Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. The starting contract is to reborn the Empress. I will return 10,000 times. Chapter 61. As everyone walked into the black and white stone gate, the scene in front of them suddenly changed, and Zhang Chuan felt in a trance. A beam of light lit up in front of his eyes, and then his field of vision suddenly broadened, and the whole person was teleported to a plane. However, the situation this time was different from the last time when they entered the corridor. The other people who walked into the black and white stone gate with Zhang Chuan did not appear here. Apparently, the formation of the ancestral land trial teleported everyone separately again. Zhang Chuan's expression remained unchanged. This situation was more or less what he expected. Looking at the endless plains, he took a deep breath and stopped where he was without moving. Zhang Chuan couldn't help but frown as he touched the universe ring on his index finger. Then he raised his foot and stepped towards the ground. With a loud bang sound, the grass under his feet was actually broken by his physical force alone. The huge and terrifying crack spread instantly, forming a rift valley stretching for thousands of meters in the blink of an eye. Zhang Chuan stood on the edge of the rift valley. His eyes were rolling in his sockets from time to time, and his brows were frowning more and more. The aura here seems to have disappeared, Zhang Chuan whispered to himself. After inhaling the air here, he already realized that something was wrong. There was no spiritual energy needed by the monks in the surrounding air. At the same time, the spiritual energy in his body seemed to be blocked by some unknown force. Even the universe ring, which consumes almost no spiritual energy, could not be opened by him. Fortunately, Zhang Chuan's physical body and the spiritual consciousness in the sea of profound knowledge can still be used. Now the huge rift under his feet has verified his thoughts at that time. In addition to the green grassland, there are only rows of low mountains left in this plain, which can almost be described as deserted. With the mentality of giving it a try, Zhang Chuan used his mental power to probe into the golden dragon ring on his left hand. Next to a huge circular lake, Luo Yue stood on the top of a huge rock in a white dress. At this moment, her expression was stern, and her beautiful eyes were looking straight at the huge cyan snake head that was less than 5 meters away from her. Luo Yue was in this space before and realized that her spiritual energy was blocked, so she kept heading south. Because she had previously improved her energy and blood power in the blood forging pool, and gained a lot of mental and physical improvements after killing the skeletons in the previous level. Therefore, even if the spiritual energy is sealed, with Luo Yue's current physical strength, she can run for more than 10 miles without blushing or gasping for breath. The lake next to her now was something she encountered unexpectedly during her journey. At the same time, Luo Yue discovered a century-old octagonal Xuanian grass that had just matured at the bottom of the lake. The octagonal Xuanian grass can be said to be a precious medicine that is as good as the earth-fire fruit heart she obtained earlier. Its function is to give the person who takes it the ability to control Xuanian's energy. If she obtains the octagonal Xuanian grass, Luo Yue can completely use her own yin and yang energy to neutralize the power of Xuanian and earth fire, allowing her to use the power of both at the same time. But there are often ferocious beasts waiting for the treasure to mature, guarding it on one side. This lake was no exception. Before she could get close, a giant python nearly 20 meters long rushed out of the lake. At this moment, the giant python turned its head sideways, and there was a faint murderous look in its golden vertical pupils. Its huge mouth opened and closed slightly, and then it began to spit out human words. "Humans, get out of here quickly, otherwise you will be responsible for the consequences." While talking, the giant python always kept a certain distance from Luo Yue. It can feel the huge energy and blood in the human woman in front of him that is so rich that it almost turns into substance. Recalling that 500 years ago, it was suppressed by a terrifying human being who had the same huge energy and blood as the human woman. When the other person left, he uprooted the octagonal mystic grass that it had cultivated for 100 years. Now 500 years have passed, but humans still refuse to let go of its octagonal Xuanian grass. On the other side, Luo Yue looked at the giant python in shock. Even in her previous life, she had rarely seen a ferocious beast that could speak human words. Her eyes traveled over the python's head, and she discovered that there were densely packed green fins on both sides of the python's head. This discovery reminded Luo Yue of the Azure Fish Python clan that was exterminated by the Zhang family thousands of years ago. This race is naturally bloodthirsty, and because of its superior innate conditions, most of the ferocious beast races in Eastern continent bow to it. The reason is that the celestial fish python clan has two cultivation paths to take. One is to jump over the dragon gate or to turn into a dragon with the body of a snake, transcending tribulation. It is rumored that the celestial fish python can speak human words as long as it reaches the same level as the human dragon transformation level. Now that she saw her, Luo Yue believed that the rumors in her early years were true. However, the rumors that the azure fish python is naturally bloodthirsty are obviously wrong. I have been here for so long, and I don't see any tendency to attack. I won't repeat my words a second time. Hand over the octagonal mystic grass obediently and I will spare your life. Luo Yue narrowed her beautiful eyes slightly and said in a warning tone. She is not worried that the azure fish python will suddenly explode, so what about the realm of dragon transformation? In this space where spiritual energy is banned, she, who possesses the top-level Daoyuan immortal body, really has no one to fear when it comes to her physical strength. With the lessons learned 500 years ago, the azure fish python has always been very vigilant. But now that it hears Luo Yue's arrogant words, how can it, who was born with noble blood, endure it? Greedy humans, you should die. The azure fish python roared and opened its bloody mouth to swallow Luo Yue in one gulp. Seeing this scene, Luo Yue's expression did not change, and she jumped down from the boulder with a side somersault. Seeing that his attack failed, the sky blue fish python became furious again and flicked its tail at Luo Yue below. After Luo Yue landed, she jumped to avoid the blows of the huge snake's tail. At the same time, she stepped on her toes, and with the impact of the snake's tail, her figure instantly reached the side of the azure fish python. I saw her right leg hooked up, and while using the force to slide, she rotated her body 720 degrees and whipped her leg heavily on the side of the azure fish python. Boom! A dull sound of gold and iron clashing sounded. The sky blue fish python felt an unstoppable force coming from it, and then its nearly 30-meter snake body was pulled out of the lake, flew into the air, and landed heavily on the ground. It shook its head and raised its head from the huge crater it had made. Before the azure fish python could make a move, Luo Yue's figure suddenly appeared like a flash, flying forward with her right leg raised and striking the azure fish python's head with another vertical chop. Boom! The head that the azure fish python had just raised was smashed to the ground again, and there was no movement for a while. And all of this happened in a flash of lightning. Luo Yue only used 2 moves from beginning to end, and won the victory with a crushing force. Looking at the azure python lying unconscious on the ground, she ignored it, turned around and jumped into the lake. Luo Yue is so anxious because the octagonal Xuanian grass has just matured and must be picked as soon as possible. Over time, the entire lake may be frozen into black ice by the Xuanian energy. Not even a moment after Luo Yue left, the azure fish python that had been unconscious in the giant pit reopened its eyes. I saw it saying sadly, "Do you really think you can defeat me with brute force? Now that you have entered my territory, let me see what else you can use against me." After saying that, it was ready to climb out of the pit and head towards the lake. "Why are you leaving in such a hurry? Why don't you welcome the guests when they arrive?" A gloomy voice came from below the azure fish python. The voice was like a demonic sound that penetrated the ears, causing the snake's body to freeze as if it had fallen into an ice cave. The azure fish python stiffly lowered its head, and saw a human man in white standing with his hands behind his back, a slight smile on his face. Just by looking at each other, azure fish python felt the hairs all over his body stand on end. Oh no, it has no hair. The fins stand upright. In its eyes, the human man's energy and blood were as deep as the ocean. What was even more frightening was that it actually had the urge to surrender to him. The azure fish python's vertical pupils shrank suddenly, and an idea suddenly appeared in its mind. Son of the true dragon. The human man who suddenly appeared under the celestial fish python was naturally Zhongquan, who had just arrived from the plains 10 miles away. When he used his mental power to probe into the golden dragon ring, he discovered that the golden dragon ring was not restricted by the aura of the space here. Then he found this place under the guidance of the golden dragon ring. On the other side, the azure fish python's first thought was to immediately stay away from the human man in front of him, and run as far away as possible. The other party's mere breath makes its soul tremble. It didn't dare to stay where it was, and it swung its snake body and prepared to crawl towards the lake. However, the hole made by the azure python was too huge, and with its thick body that stretched for tens of meters, it was unable to climb out of the hole immediately. What's even more strange is that the terrifying human being with blood like a dragon has always stood there indifferently, as if he is not worried that it will escape at all. Seeing this, the azure fish python increased its speed again, and within a few breaths its head was about to rush out of the pit. Just when it was secretly happy, it soon discovered that its entire snake body could no longer move an inch. The azure python suddenly turned its head and looked down, only to see that its tail was being stepped on by a foot. The green scales on the snake's tail were shattered inch by inch, and the entire tip of the tail was dented by the foot. A large amount of blood spattered out and scattered on the ground to form a blood-red river. "Did I tell you to leave?" The indifferent voice was vaguely accompanied by the dragon's power. The azure fish python couldn't help but tremble, and it was so frightened that it didn't dare to make any move. As one of the few overlords in this space, it was the first time that the azure fish python felt that it was so close to death. Even 500 years ago, the terrifying man who took away its only two 8-pointed Xuanian grass could not be so fierce. Now it is like a little grass snake that encounters a ferocious beast when it is lost. The other party only needs to move its legs and feet to determine its life or death. "Sir, please spare my life. I am willing to hand over the octagonal mystic grass to you, and please let me live." The azure fish python begged bitterly, holding back the pain. If it dies, their lineage of azure fish and pythons will really become extinct. In addition, it had not yet transformed into a dragon, and had not yet married and had children with its beloved female snake, so it was too depressing to die like this. As soon as Tian Qingyu Python finished speaking, Zhang Chuan's foot on the snake's tail suddenly exerted force and kept grinding against the bloody tail tip. Severe pain hit, causing the azure fish python to twist its body and roar. But no matter how hard it struggled, it couldn't break free from the constraints of Zhang Chuan's feet. "Are you going to climb down by yourself, or do you want me to loosen the bones for you?" Zhang Chuan raised his head with cold eyes and said calmly to the azure fish python. The azure fish python trembled when he heard this, and hurriedly climbed down from above. The entire snake head was prostrate in front of Zhang Chuan, not daring to be disrespectful at all. Zhang Chuan stretched out his hand and gently patted the head of the huge snake that was as tall as himself and said, "Snakes that obey you live longer." Just like that, the azure fish python almost stunned Zhang Chuan's overbearing long way. In fact, with Zhang Chuan's current three major physiques, he also took the essence and blood of Beihai Longzhen and the 10,000-fold return reward obtained in the previous level. His physical cultivation has already exceeded the limit of the powerful realm, and he can kill heavenly soldier with a snap of his fingers. Not to mention it's just a azure fish python in the dragon transformation realm, even a monk at the peak of the great power realm can't block his physical punch. As for why he wanted to keep the azure fish python instead of using the Zanshiju to control the opponent in order to understand this world, the main reason is that after the knowledge-cutting technique invades other people's sea of consciousness, it will take away part of Zhang Chuan's mental power, which consumes a lot of money for him. Therefore, if he can make his opponent surrender with force, he often does not bother to use the Zanshiju. Then Zhang Chuan suddenly stretched out his hand to clasp the fins on the side of the azure fish python, and with one step, he jumped out of the pit with his huge body. During the process, the celestial fish python felt unbearable pain, as if its fins would be torn off by the opponent at the next moment. At the same time, a sense of familiarity arose in its heart, as if it had been dragged by someone's fins before. After thinking for a moment, the herring python recalled that the human who took away another 8 anise Xuanian grass from it 500 years ago seemed to have done the same thing. But the difference between the two is that 500 years ago, it was grabbed by the fins and smashed randomly. When it touched the ground, the azure fish python had time to observe the appearance of Zhang Chuan. But the more I looked at it, the more frightened I became. Why does this gentleman look so similar to the guy who beat me 500 years ago? After getting out of the pothole, Zhang Chuan casually threw the azure fish python aside, ignoring the slightly aggrieved look in his eyes, and looked towards the lake ahead. The surface of the lake was sparkling, and under the sunlight, wisps of rising cold air could be seen with the naked eye. Standing by the lake, Zhang Chuan could even feel the biting cold air passing through his sleeves and trouser legs, as if he had gone from hot summer to cold winter in the blink of an eye. Less than a moment later, ripples suddenly appeared on the lake surface, and the thin ice that had condensed on the surface broke at the same time. A white figure emerged from the lake, tapped its toes on the lake surface, and then returned to the shore. But here comes the problem. Since the spiritual energy is banned, Luo Yue cannot use the spiritual energy to evaporate the water on her body. So at this moment, you can see that her whole body is wet, her long wet hair sticks to her cheeks, and her tall and straight figure is perfectly outlined, like a peerless fairy flower that has fallen into the mortal world. Then Luo Yue suddenly frowned slightly. She had no spiritual energy, but she could still use her mental power. Just now she instinctively felt the gaze, and she turned around suddenly, and the next second she met Zhang Chuan's interested eyes. "Why are you here?" Luo Yue narrowed her beautiful eyes and asked. Then he looked down at his wet appearance, and a blush appeared on his cheeks. She quickly crossed her hands and covered her chest, blocking Zhang Chuan's desire to look any further. At this time, Zhang Chuan took steps in Luo Yue's direction. At the same time, his hands began to untie the belt around his waist and took off the white coat on his body. He came to Luo Yue, handed over his coat, and said lightly, "Take it and put it on, I'll wait for you here." Hearing this, Luo Yue raised her eyes and glanced at Zhang Chuan, took out a hand and took the coat he handed over, then turned around and got into the woods behind. As the rustling sound came out, Zhang Chuan touched his nose and walked up to the azure fish python. He jumped on the snake's head and sat down to wait quietly. Within a moment, Luo Yue's figure appeared again. Zhang Chuan's loose robe was worn on her body without any violation, and even made her feel a little more delicate. Luo Yue turned her head away and did not look at Zhang Chuan. She made fists and rubbed her hands under her long and wide sleeves. It is impossible to say that the situation just now was not embarrassing. She never expected that Zhang Chuan would appear here just as she was picking octagonal Xuanian grass. Zhang Chuan stood up on top of Tian Qingyu Python's head, waved to Luo Yue and asked, "How's it going? Did you get the octagonal Xuanian grass?" Hearing this, Luo Yue was stunned, and her eyes stayed on the azure fish python under Zhang Chuan for a moment, wondering in her heart how Zhang Chuan managed to subdue the azure fish python in such a short period of time. "I got this first," Luo Yue said with her red lips slightly pursed. She has never been in the habit of giving away what she gets. Zhang Chuan shook his head and sneered, "It's just a precious medicine, but I can't take it seriously. Now that you have got the things, you will follow me in a moment and don't move around." After that, he jumped down from the top of the sky blue fish python and walked towards Luo Yue. Luo Yue suddenly raised her eyes and looked at Zhang Chuan, her eyebrows slightly furrowed, and she asked, "Why?" She had thought about walking alone before, and she was confident that no one in this space could be her opponent in terms of physical strength, except of course Zhang Chuan. Furthermore, if she and Zhang Chuan go together, how should the resources obtained then be distributed? "I'm not interested in the spiritual materials and medicines here. The trials of the ancestral land are not limited to these two levels. You and I must go together to find the exit first. If you need anything here, just ask." Zhang Chuan seemed to see through Luo Yue's thoughts at the moment, and said calmly as he walked. Luo Yue thought about it carefully and felt that what the other party said was reasonable, so she nodded and agreed. Zhang Chuan has the limitations of the heavenly Tao oath, and the credibility of her words is actually more than 80%. Seeing that the other party nodded in agreement, Zhang Chuan came to stand beside him, then turned around and waved to the azure fish python. "Come here, there are some things I need to know from you," Zhang Chuan said calmly. Seeing the two people who had beaten it violently before come together, the azure fish python became more and more uneasy. I saw it squirming in place for a while, then crawled in front of Zhang Chuan and the two of them with its head hanging down, and said in a trembling voice, "Please give me your instructions, sir." Zhang Chuan looked directly at the azure fish python and said coldly, "Tell me everything you know about this space. Don't try to get away with it. I have plenty of ways to find out whether you are lying." Intimidated by the dragon power emanating from Zhang Chuan, the azure fish python's eyes showed a look of horror, and it trembled. Sir, I actually don't know what this space is called, but we and the ferocious beasts named it the Forbidden Spirit Realm. This lake is where I usually live, and 100 miles around the lake is my territory. There are 4 other beast kings who occupy the same area as me in the Forbidden Spirit world. They are the Tiger King of the 100 Beasts Mountain, the Crocodile King of the Misty Mountain Swamp, the Eagle King of Tengchi Peak, and the Dragon King of Falling Dragon Valley, and I am the Python King of the Domineering Forest. As he spoke, the azure fish python's eyes were still slightly proud. It took a long time to come up with such a domineering name for its territory. Falling Dragon Valley. When Zhang Chuan heard the words, Falling Dragon Valley, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and asked curiously. Could it be that there were dragon corpses included in the trial of their Zhang family's ancestral land? Hearing this, the azure fish python quickly explained, Sir, you don't know something. The Dragon Falling Valley did not have a real dragon falling, but the Zhao King gave it a self-proclaimed territory. As it spoke, a look of disdain appeared in its eyes, and it was obvious that its relationship with the Zhao King was not harmonious. Zhang Chuan nodded and continued, Then have you ever seen humans living in the Forbidden Spirit world? Azure Fish Python lowered his gaze and glanced at Zhang Chuan and the two of them. After thinking for a moment, he said, In my memory, there are no humans living in the Forbidden Spirit realm, but every once in a while, humans like you, sir, will suddenly appear and come in to hunt ferocious beasts. Even I don't remember how many batches there are specifically. I only know that in the Forbidden Spirit world, we ferocious beasts don't seem to get old, sick, or die, but because of the Forbidden Spirit energy, we can't improve our cultivation. Zhang Chuan and Luo Yue looked at each other when they heard this, and both saw shock in each other's eyes. These ferocious beasts can stay immortal in this space. But neither of them have any intention of staying here to live out their old days. Not to mention that it is impossible to use spiritual energy to practice here, there is not even a place for humans to live and eat. We can't let them live in the mountains and eat ferocious beasts every day. Then do you know how those who came here before left the Forbidden Spirit world? Zhang Chuan asked. Sir, I don't know about this matter. Every time a human comes in, I will go back to my lair. Not only me, but also the other 4 beast kings. Because every time a large number of humans come in, there will be people like you who are extremely powerful and cannot be messed with. As he spoke, the blue fish python felt even more frightened. It almost died at the hands of humans back then. If that human wasn't just trying to take away the octagonal Xuanian grass, maybe its domineering forest would have been replaced by a beast king now. Zhang Chuan pondered for a moment, and then said calmly to the azure fish python, Then you will lead the way, and we will go to the 100 Beasts Mountain first. After listening to azure fish python's previous explanation, he understood that the others should have also been transported to the Forbidden Spirit realm. Since there is no clue about the exit in the azure fish python, let's check them one by one, find the others first, and then dig through the Beast King's territory. You can always find them. Hearing this, Tian Qingyu Python seemed to have thought of something, and whispered to Zhang Chuan, Sir, if you want to go to Bai Beast Mountain, there happens to be a Zhongyan tiger in my territory that can act as a vanguard. It was driven down the mountain by the Tiger King of 100 Beasts Mountain, and it was me who had no way to go before he defected to me. Zhang Chuan thought about it and felt that it made sense. It was much more comfortable to have a tiger as a mount than to sit on the head of a snake all day long. After discussing it with Luo Yue, the two of them set off for Zhongyunyu's cave. The celestial fish python crawled very fast, and it came to a cave halfway up the mountain with ease. Before it could even open its mouth to call out, it was interrupted by a wave from Zhang Chuan overhead. Zhang Chuan frowned, and saw that the entrance of the cave below was covered with blood, and a lot of blood even spattered on the trees around the cave. It was obvious that there had been a battle here before. Judging from the color of the blood on the ground, both sides should have suffered varying degrees of injuries. Go and have a look in the cave. Zhang Chuan stamped his foot and gave instructions to the azure fish python. But Luo Yue on the side pointed to another direction outside the cave and said, Wait, let's go there first. Hearing this, Tian Qingyu Python was not happy. It was okay for the adult to give him orders. How dare this fool dare to yell at me? Humph, my lord told me to go to the cave first. Are you deaf? As he spoke, he winked at Zhang Chuan with a flattering look, showing his loyalty. Luo Yue seemed not to have expected that the azure fish python that was now their mount would reject her. Her beautiful eyebrows were slightly raised, and her eyes looked at the azure fish python with a bit of unkindness. It seems that at this time, he is already thinking about how to cook the python meat to make it delicious. Just when the azure fish python was about to carry the two of them into the cave, Zhang Chuan's voice sounded again. If you don't want to die, just do what she says. He could clearly see the look in Luo Yue's eyes just now. If the azure python provoked it again, it would never see the sun the next day. As Zhang Chuan finished speaking, the azure fish python suddenly turned the front of the car, reacting as fast as a hurricane, and in the blink of an eye it came to the location pointed out by Luo Yue. It can only be said that Tianqing Yuba is indeed a bachelor who has been lonely for countless years. This place is located among the trees on the right side of the cave. Luo Yue took the lead in jumping down from the head of the azure fish python, walked straight into a bush, bent down and picked up a piece of blood-stained cloth. Zhang Chuan followed closely and walked to his side. When he saw the cloth in the other person's hand, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and said, "It seems that both parties in the battle are not ferocious beasts. One of them is most likely someone else who entered the ancestral land for trial." Luo Yue nodded, and then found another rag on a bush beside her. Putting the two rags in front of her and comparing them, she calmly analyzed. The two pieces of cloth are made of different materials. Apparently more than one person has fought Zhang Yanhu before. As she spoke, she turned her gaze to the entrance of the cave not far away, then walked straight forward, saying as she walked, "Follow me and go take a look inside the cave." Looking at Luo Yue who suddenly took the initiative, Zhang Chuan stood there stunned for a second. Then he ordered the azure fish python to guard outside the cave, while he followed Luo Yue's footsteps into the cave. The cave is damp and cold, and many weeds that have been cut off to their roots can be seen in the corners of the rocks on both sides. It is obvious that Zhang Yanhu pays great attention to his personal hygiene. Walking on the still dry blood, the smell of blood around them was inhaled into their nostrils. The deeper you go into the cave, the smell of blood around you becomes stronger. Without stopping, the two of them went straight to the end of the cave. The smell of blood here is extremely strong, and at the end of the cave there is only a large mat made of some kind of thick-stemmed hay. Lying on the straw mat was a huge Zhongyan tiger, with gray and red hair all over its body. At this moment, its tiger's mouth was slightly open, and its round eyes turned to look straight at Zhang Chuan. His eyes seemed to contain overwhelming hatred and a trace of unwillingness. Zhang Chuan glanced at Zhang Yanhu silently like an ice knife, and saw blood constantly emerging from his mouth and many parts of his body, dyeing the straw mat under him red, and some of the blood gathered into a trickle and spread all the way to the mountain entrance of the cave. After discovering that there were multiple fatal wounds on his body, Zhang Chuan made no move, but turned his gaze to Luo Yue and said calmly, "This Zhongyan tiger is dead." Under the observation of his spiritual consciousness, Zhang Yunhu's life breath was completely gone at this time, and his actions just now were obviously a reflection of his past. Luo Yue nodded after hearing this, and scanned the surrounding environment again. "I saw all kinds of ferocious beast furs being randomly discarded on the ground, and some of them had signs of being torn, as if they had been broken into and robbed. Someone should have killed Zhang Yanhu and looted all the valuable treasures in its cave." At this point, she paused and thought for a moment before frowning and saying, "But what makes me wonder is, how did they take so much stuff away? It can be seen from the furs of those huge ferocious beasts that the things stored in them are either large in size or extremely large in quantity. However, in the forbidden spirit realm, no one can activate the spiritual energy, and naturally the universe ring cannot be used. Those few people were able to loot everything and leave without leaving any traces. This was somewhat strange." Zhang Chuan showed no emotion at all and just pretended to say inadvertently, "There will still be a trace of spiritual consciousness remaining after the return of light. If there is a way to deal with spiritual consciousness, we should be able to view the memory before his death." Hearing this, Luo Yue's eyes lit up. After Zhang Chuan's reminder, she remembered that the Zanshiju could not only cut off the enemy's consciousness but also obtain the opponent's memory. Although her current consciousness-cutting technique is just the beginning, the remaining residual consciousness against Zhang Yunhu is definitely enough. I have a way, Luo Yue said lightly. Then he immediately activated the consciousness-cutting technique to cut off Zhang Yunhu's remaining consciousness before it dissipated. As the memories entered her mind, Luo Yue's frown gradually relaxed. Less than a moment later, she seemed to have completely digested the memory of Zhang Yunhu before his death. Luo Yue turned to look at Zhongquan and told her what she had just seen in Zhang Yunhu's memory. It includes how a man and a woman killed Zhang Yunhu, and the memory of the secret portal that appeared next to them after Zhang Yunhu died. The reason why the man and woman were able to take away all the spiritual materials and herbs was because they threw all the items into the teleportation portal, and at the same time, the two of them disappeared together after entering the portal. After Zhang Chuan understood what happened, he nodded and said, "In this case, we only need to find the ferocious beast and kill it before we can leave the forbidden spirit world and go to the next trial. However, we can't guess from Luo Yue's description that there should be certain restrictions on the appearance and entry of the teleportation portal. The portal disappears together after the two people enter. Either there is a time limit, or it can only be passed by two people. As for what level of ferocious beasts must be killed before the teleportation portal appears, Zhang Chuan has not thought about this issue. As long as you know how to get out of here, it will be easy. It would be better to loot the dens of the 5 beast kings in the Forbidden Spirit realm first, and finally pick one to kill based on your mood before leaving." After Luo Yue told Zhang Chuan everything, she stopped talking and ran to the pile of ferocious beast skins alone to start messing with something. Zhang Chuan stood behind and watched, until Luo Yue stood up carrying a huge bundle wrapped in layers of ferocious beast fur. His eyes lingered on the huge bundle for a moment. Under the layers of fur of the ferocious beast, Zhang Chuan could still feel the cold air hitting his face that penetrated his bones. Then Zhang Chuan narrowed his eyes slightly and said coldly, "The yin energy of the octagonal mystic yin grass is so strong, why didn't you take it out earlier?" Only then did he remember that he had never seen the octagonal Xuanian grass since Luo Yue broke out of the lake and appeared. In the Forbidden Spirit world, even if you obtain the treasure medicine, you cannot take it without the help of spiritual energy to refine it. You don't have to worry about it, I have my own sense of discretion. Luo Yue just glanced at the other party, said nothing, and walked straight out of the cave carrying the huge burden. In fact, she had always hidden the octagonal Xuanian grass in her sleeves. She could still rely on her strong body to suppress the yin energy emitted by it. But in the Forbidden Spirit world without the blessing of spiritual energy, her wrists were still bruised by the cold over time. Although there was no injury, the flexibility of the wrist was temporarily affected. Seeing the innocent figure wearing his own big robe and walking with a huge burden on his back, Zhang Chuan exhaled, shook his head and said to himself, "Trouble." The azure fish python who was guarding the door outside the cave saw Zhang Chuan and the two walking out one after the other. Just as he was about to step forward to greet him, he saw a huge baggage suddenly flying toward its head at the speed of an arrow. Before the azure fish python could dodge, the baggage exuding a cold air hit its head. It felt as if there was an iceberg growing on top of its head, and the entire huge snake body couldn't help but tremble. Even the hard and thick snake scales could only barely stop it. Knowing that it was the baggage thrown by Luo Yue, the azure fish python did not dare to move around randomly, and suppressed the coldness and leaned down to prepare to greet the two of Zhang Chuan. As soon as Zhang Chuan and Luo Yue walked up to the top of the snake head, he said, "Zhang Yunhu is dead. There is no need to waste time. Now take us to the 100 Beasts Mountain." "What? Who killed Zhang Yunhu? I want to cut him into pieces." Snapped. A voice sounded, "Shut up." "Oh, Forbidden Spirit Realm, 100 Beast Mountain." By the stream at the foot of a low mountain, a group of 5-meter-tall gray-furred tigers surrounded a man and a woman. Every gray-furred tiger has a fierce look in its eyes, bared teeth, and from time to time there will be a vibration sound like an imperial engine coming from its belly. They were looking at each other with eager eyes, as if they would pounce on the two people in the center and bite them in the next moment. Zhang Feng looked around warily at this moment, but the cold sweat on his forehead could tell that he was uneasy at this moment. As one of the Dragon Transformation Realm members of the Zhang family who entered the Ancestral Land Trial, Zhang Feng has always been very conceited. After entering the Forbidden Spirit world, even though he knew that the spiritual energy could not be used, he still chose to walk alone. While walking in Beisho Mountain, he unexpectedly met Li Yuxin. Zhang Feng remembered that the other party was the Taoist monk brought by Zhang Yu, who was killed by Zhang Xiangming and whose body was completely cold at this time. After seeing the other party's charming face and graceful figure, he couldn't help but feel compassion. In his heart, he had already forgotten the Taoist monk who accompanied him into the ancestral land for trial. After Li Yuxin learned about Zhang Yu's death through the Silver Phoenix ring, she had already wanted to find another supporter. After meeting Zhang Feng, the two chatted happily and hit it off. Just when the two of them are deeply in love and want to find a place to try what they love to do. But by chance, I saw a tigress with snow-white fur taking a bath in a stream, and then I heard the tigress let out a loud roar. Immediately afterwards, dozens of gray-furred tigers rushed out from nowhere and surrounded the two of them. Zhang Feng swallowed slowly, although he didn't know why the group of gray-furred tigers in front of him only surrounded them but did not move forward to attack. But he knew in his heart that if he didn't act now, when other ferocious beasts came over, the two of them would really be unable to leave. Exener, you hide behind me first. Don't worry, I will definitely take you out. As he said this, Zhang Feng looked beside him with a smile that he thought was so handsome. I saw Li Yuxin's figure beside him. Before he said this, the other party had already hidden behind him. Zhang Feng retracted his smile with embarrassment, and at the same time he felt a little more dissatisfied with Li Yuxin. At this moment, he clenched his fists and fixed his eyes on a relatively weak-looking gray-furred tiger, hoping to use it as a breakthrough. Just when Zhang Feng was about to use his fists and kicks to attack the gray-haired tiger, a roar carrying the aura of a king suddenly resounded through the entire mountain forest, and the sound like breaking mountains and cracking rocks made his eardrums hurt. At the same time, the movements in his hands stopped, and his eyes looked in the direction of the roar. I saw a tiger 5 times larger than other gray-furred tigers walking straight towards Zhang Feng. Its hair was golden, and the word, Wang, on its head was extremely dark and faintly shiny. With every step it took, the ground beneath its feet seemed to be unable to bear it and began to vibrate violently. Behind him was White Tiger, who had been peeped in the bath by Zhang Feng and his 2 men earlier. At this time, he was rubbing the golden-haired tiger's thigh affectionately. The group of gray-furred tigers that had originally surrounded Zhang Feng and stared at them with eager eyes suddenly dropped to their knees and buried their heads, purring as if to welcome the arrival of their king. As the golden-haired tiger stepped forward, he began to utter human words under the shocked eyes of Zhang Feng and the others. I am the golden-haired tiger king. How dare you 2 humans spy on my wife taking a bath? Are you 2 ready to be made into adults? Looking at the golden-haired tiger king who was suddenly gushing out words, Zhang Feng clenched his fists and his whole body began to tremble uncontrollably. The domineering aura of the golden-haired tiger king was so overwhelming that Zhang Feng could hardly breathe. Li Yuxin, who was hiding behind him, was even more flushed and out of breath. Tiger King, we don't mean to offend you. The previous incident about your lady taking a bath was purely a misunderstanding. I am here to apologize to my lady. I wonder if you can let me leave first. I, Zhang Feng, promise that I will never set foot here again. Zhang Feng endured the discomfort in his heart and forced out a smile. He didn't expect that one day he would be aggrieved and apologize to a tigress. But the golden retriever tiger king didn't seem to accept his so-called apology, and still walked towards him. At the same time, the group of gray-furred tigers that had been lying on the ground began to get up again, and once again surrounded Zhang Feng and his 2 men. Tear these 2 humans apart for me. Before Zhang Feng could think of a countermeasure, the golden-haired tiger king suddenly gave an order. After receiving the order, the gray-furred tigers immediately pounced on Zhang Feng and the 2 men, with such a power that it made people feel heartbroken. However, given the realms of Zhang Feng and Li Yuxin, even if their spiritual energy is banned, they can still beat these gray-haired tigers physically. For a time, the battle between the 2 sides actually formed a delicate balance, and no one could do anything to the other. Seeing this, the golden-haired tiger king's eyes narrowed slightly. After running for a while, his huge tiger body jumped up high, and his powerful and heavy palms shot straight at Zhang Feng and the 2. When the gray-furred tigers saw this scene, they dispersed in fear, turned around and fled to the rear. On the other side, Zhang Feng's pupils shrank, knowing that his physical body would never be able to withstand the blow from the golden-haired Tiger King. At the same time, he could clearly see Li Yuxin's movement towards the rear, and this scene could not help but make him feel angry. Zhang Feng turned around and suddenly reached out to grab Li Yuxin's long hair, exerting force on his wrist. Ah! Li Yuxin screamed and her center of gravity suddenly became unstable, and her whole body began to fall backwards. Zhang Feng took advantage of the situation and kicked the opponent's side waist, pushing the opponent to the position where Tianyan, the golden-haired Tiger King's fleshy palm struck. Li Yuxin vomited blood in the air and looked at Zhang Feng with fear and viciousness in her eyes. Li Yuxin's body was slapped by the golden-haired Tiger King, and the sharp tiger claws tore half of her flesh and blood. At the same time, the terrifying power that shattered mountains and cracked rocks directly drove her body into the ground, and the only proof that she had appeared in this world was the extremely conspicuous human-shaped hole on the ground. Taking advantage of Li Yuxin's delaying time for him, Zhang Feng turned around and fled in one direction. But before he could run a few miles, a nearly 30-meter-long giant python rushed out of the woods on the right in a flash of lightning. Before Zhang Feng could react, the huge snake body crushed him. After being crushed, he felt sore all over his body and couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, Zhang Feng's sea of consciousness was suddenly torn open by a certain force, and the entire sea of consciousness was eroded and swallowed by the inexplicable influx of black mist. On the other side, the azure fish python that was originally carrying Zhang Chuan and the two people so fast slowed down and asked Zhang Chuan softly. Sir, did I bump into someone just now? Zhang Chuan just glanced coldly and said, do your own thing. Killing Zhang Feng was not his sudden intention. Zhang Shuyuan had already told him that Zhang Siqi would find someone to harm him in the ancestral land trial, and later gave him a list of names when the two of them lived under the same roof. The people on the list were all those who had accepted Zhang Siqi's benefits and wanted to join forces to suppress him in the ancestral land trial, and Zhang Feng was one of them. Since they met, Zhang Chuan never thought about letting the other person leave alive. Yes, sir, the azure fish python responded and rushed towards the 100 Beasts mountain again. At the same time, it happened to pass by the golden-haired Tiger King who was chasing Zhang Feng from the other direction. The golden-haired Tiger King led a group of his men back to the foot of his mountain. It was already the moon above the treetops, and it was almost late at night. At this moment, there was silence in the mountain of hundreds of beasts, except for the trembling sound of the ground caused by the golden-haired Tiger King's feet touching the ground, echoing in the mountain. The golden-haired Tiger King's eyes were spinning in his sockets from time to time. He always felt that something was not right in the 100 Beasts mountain tonight. Logically speaking, his offspring and grandsons would still be excited even at night, and they wished he could have more grandsons. But today was uncharacteristically the whole mountain and forest was eerily silent. The golden-haired Tiger King even thought he had gone to the wrong door just now. Originally, the appearance of humans was enough to worry it, but now even its own territory is starting to have problems. The golden-haired Tiger King's eyes widened and he looked straight at the huge cave on the top of the mountain, which was his bedroom, where he usually rested. But today, the cave is brightly lit, like a bright flower blooming from the darkness. The golden-haired Tiger King's heart skipped a beat. His hometown would not be robbed. Under the dull gazes of the tigers behind him, the golden-haired Tiger King looked up to the sky and roared loudly, then turned into a golden lightning bolt and ran towards the top of the mountain. At this moment, both sides of the cave were lined with tiger beasts with their limbs broken off and dying. The necks of each ferocious beast were abnormally swollen, as if they had been forced into their mouths by some giant human being. As a result, no matter how they opened their mouths, they could only make a low moan. Even the silver-haired tiger, who was the second in command of Beisho Mountain, had his limbs broken and was thrown into a corner, shaking his head in pain. The golden-haired Tiger King stopped and saw this scene. He was immediately furious. His golden hair stood on end, and his entire tiger body seemed to have expanded several times again. Then, under the pitiful whines and expectant looks of the tigers, it rushed straight into the cave. But the further inside the golden Tiger King became, the more frightened he became. Almost all the dozens of ferocious beasts that had settled in his base camp were trapped here. It could be described as a tragedy among tigers. The Golden Tiger King kept walking all the way to the deepest part of the cave. Deep in the cave, 4 luminous pearls fell in all directions, blooming with dazzling white light. With just one glance, the Golden Retriever Tiger King noticed that there was an extremely huge python lying on the couch where it usually rested. The fins on both sides of its body were swinging, as if it would reveal its sharp fangs in the next moment. The enemy attacks. What shocked the Golden Tiger King even more was that there was a human race young man sitting on the back of the giant python. The opponent's energy and blood were as deep as the sea, and from time to time he was accompanied by dragon roars. The man just sat there quietly, but the golden-haired Tiger King felt like there was a big mountain on his back, weighing him down and making him unable to breathe. Zhang Chuan crossed his legs, slowly looked at the golden-haired Tiger King, and said calmly, "You are the Tiger King of 100 Beasts Mountain. It's really easy for me to wait." Zhangchuan, 2 people and 1 snake actually arrived at the base camp of Beisho Mountain an hour ago. It's a pity that before he saw the Golden Tiger King, he was beaten and killed by a group of fierce tiger beasts. Before he could take action, the celestial fish python took the initiative and turned the mountain of beasts upside down. It broke all the taiga's limbs and threw them into the Tiger King's cave. As for Luo Yue, she was called by Zhang Chuan to rob the treasure house of Beisho Mountain. Asking a girl of luck to help search for property is probably something only Zhang Chuan can do. The golden-haired Tiger King heard Zhang Chuan's disdainful words, and his anger surged, and he roared angrily. "Humans, we have no grievances. Now that you are hurting my people and occupying my cave, do you really think that I, the Tiger King, am a vegetarian? And you, a stinking snake, are willing to be human race's lackeys? You have completely disgraced us beasts." After saying that, the domineering aura around it was about to burst out, like a torrential river rushing towards the person and snake on the opposite side. Zhang Chuan didn't change his expression at the power coming from above his head. He chuckled and spoke again. "You dare to kill the disciples of our clan, and yet you dare to say that there is no injustice or enmity. Today, the Holy Sun of Japan will seek justice for them." Hearing this, the golden-haired Tiger King realized that the other party had come to avenge the woman he had killed earlier. On the other side, the azure fish python under Zhangchuan's seat opened and closed its mouth, and a sharp voice came from its mouth. "Huang Mao, don't think I'm afraid of you. As long as you surrender quickly and become my master's mount, I might be able to spare your life." As he spoke, the azure fish python turned its head and said respectfully to Zhang Chuan, "Sir, let me catch that yellow hair." Hearing this, Zhang Chuan just waved his hand and said calmly, "Since you are so confident, then go ahead." After the words fell, the azure fish python waited for Zhang Chuan to remove its butt from its back before daring to move its body. I saw the azure fish python opening its bloody mouth, and like thunder, it instantly fought with the golden-haired Tiger King opposite. The confrontation between the 2 beast kings of the Forbidden Spirit realm can be described as shaking the world and breaking rocks. The collision between flesh and body caused the cave to nearly collapse. The golden-haired Tiger King couldn't help but stare at the snake's tail whipping towards him. It raised its palm and slapped the snake's tail violently, and its sharp claws dug into the flesh of the azure fish python like a hook. Accompanied by the roar of the azure fish python, the fleshy palm suddenly exerted force, tearing off a large piece of flesh in the blink of an eye, with snake blood splattering everywhere. At the same time, the force was so great that it threw the azure fish python into the air and landed beside the river. Feeling the severe pain coming from its tail, the azure fish python couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. It felt even more aggrieved. If the adults hadn't almost stepped on its snake tail before, it wouldn't have been able to lose to the Tiger King so easily. Although he thought so in his heart, Azure Fish Python said, "Sir, this Tiger King's strength has greatly increased, you must be careful." Zhang Chuan glanced at the embarrassed appearance of the celestial fish python, but said nothing, and turned to look directly at the golden-haired Tiger King again. "This holy sun will give you 3 times. If you still don't kneel down and beg for mercy, I will pull out your tiger teeth immediately." Zhang Chuan said calmly. As he spoke, his deep gaze ran across the golden-haired Tiger King's body like a sharp blade, and at the same time, the blood and energy in his body shot straight into the sky with every breath he took. The golden-haired Tiger King had won the battle just now, and he looked arrogant for a moment, Humph, how dare a mere human race speak so generously to me? It knows that Zhongquan has dragon blood and must be one of the best in the human race. But it doesn't believe that a human race's body can rival its own. In terms of bloodline, it is the noble golden flame king tiger, even worse than the herring python. 3. You don't overestimate your capabilities. How can you defeat me after 3 seconds? 2. 1. Golden retriever tiger king. As the words fell, Zhang Chuan's pupils slowly shrank, and actually turned into cold vertical pupils under the shocked gaze of the golden-haired tiger king. Immediately afterwards, the sound of dragon roars oscillated outwards from the center of Zhongquan, as if a real dragon had descended, overwhelming the sky. This is the bloodline divine ability that he automatically awakened after absorbing a drop of the blood essence of Beihai Dragon Lord, Dragon Roar 9 Heavens. Bloodline divine ability, as the name suggests, is a divine ability that does not require the stimulation of spiritual energy and relies on the power of one's own bloodline. As the terrifying might of the 9-day dragon roar came over, the golden-haired tiger king was shocked. But before it could react, the azure fish python opposite suddenly fell to the ground, with blood pouring out of its mouth and nose. The golden-haired tiger king trembled all over. At this moment, it had exactly the same idea as the azure fish python when it first encountered Zhang Chuan, that is, run away. It just doesn't want this 100-beast mountain anymore, and it doesn't want to face this terrifying human again. But the next second it found that its body was suddenly unable to move. When it lowered its head and looked down, it saw that its limbs had kneeled on the ground at some point. At the same time, the golden tiger king felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on his back, and he could faintly hear the sound of bones breaking in his limbs. Despicable human being. You clearly promised 3 seconds, but you didn't keep your word. The golden-haired tiger king roared sternly. Upon hearing this, Zhang Chuan just walked up to the other party and stepped on the other party's head. The golden-haired tiger king felt a strong force coming from him, and his head hit the ground uncontrollably. The huge impact made a big hole in the ground. I just said to count 3 numbers. As for how fast I count, it all depends on my mood. Zhang Chuan said calmly. The golden-haired tiger king kept bleeding from his mouth, but he still gritted his teeth and roared. Human being, even if I become a ghost, I will never let you go. Seeing the unyielding look on the golden-haired tiger king's face, Zhang Chuan suddenly raised a sinister smile on his lips. I saw him slowly leaning down, and with lightning speed, he grabbed the opponent's fangs with one hand, and suddenly exerted force on his arm, uprooting him in an instant. Along with the golden-haired tiger king's miserable howl, a large amount of blood spattered out, dyeing half of Zhongquan's clothes red. The golden-haired tiger king was trembling all over, and now he realized that the figure in white clothes and blood-stains standing in front of him was a complete devil. Zhang Chuan played with the huge sharp teeth that were 1 meter long in his hand, and a little cold light burst out in his eyes. I saw him holding the root of the sharp tooth and stabbing hard at the left front paw of the golden-haired tiger king. The sharp teeth instantly penetrated the opponent's fleshy palm without any hindrance, pinning him firmly to the ground. Then Zhang Chuan said expressionlessly, "Now, I will give you 2 choices. Either hand over all the spiritual herbs and elixirs you have hidden, and then follow me to loot the other 3 beast kings. I, the Holy Sun, can spare your life. Either I, the Holy Sun, will personally pull out all your tiger teeth and scrape open every piece of flesh on your body." The reason why the golden-haired tiger king was spared was not because Zhang Chuan had good intentions and didn't like killing. The main reason is that he is too lazy to do it himself. There will be 3 beast kings in the future. If he needs to do it himself every time, it will be too cheap. I would like to ask which noble son of the family would be a lone ranger like the protagonist of the novel, running around exhausted. The golden-haired tiger king watched with his own eyes as his flesh palm was nailed to the ground by the devil in front of him. As the heart-breaking pain hit him, the look of fear in his eyes became more intense. A mixture of blood and water flowed out of its mouth, and its entire tiger face was distorted to the extreme. It gasped and said, "I am willing to surrender to you, sir. Please forgive me for my previous disrespect and spare me once." As the golden-haired tiger king finished speaking, Zhang Chuan slowly retracted his right leg that was on the opponent's head, but still maintained the pressure of Long Xiao Judian and decided to let the opponent lie on the ground for a while longer. At this time, there was a sudden sound of footsteps in the cave passage. Immediately afterwards, Luo Yue was seen running and carrying large and small bags. She frowned as she looked at the blood splattered on the ground and the golden-haired Tiger King lying on the ground, breathing more than in. Then Luo Yue smashed all the parcels in her hand onto the head of the azure fish python. The azure fish python, who was beaten again for no apparent reason, now had a look of resentment on his face. Who did I provoke and who provoked me? Luo Yue came to Zhang Chuan's side, glanced at the golden-haired Tiger King who was still moaning on the ground, and said, "This guy's treasure house contains some relatively low-grade elixirs, which are far inferior to the top-grade elixirs." She had almost turned over the treasure house in the 100 Beasts Mountain before, but she had not found any top-quality medicine that could compare with the octagonal Xuanian grass. Hearing this, Zhang Chuan lowered his head and looked at the golden retriever Tiger King again. The other party was even more stunned when he saw this, and then begged with a sad face. "Sir, I have put all my things in the treasure house. I really don't have any of the best medicines you mentioned." Zhang Chuan and Luo Yue looked at each other, and then had no intention of interrogating the golden retriever Tiger King again. Instead, he pulled out the sharp teeth nailed to the opponent's palm and withdrew his suppression. The golden-haired Tiger King raised his eyes and secretly glanced at Zhang Chuan. Seeing that the other party had no intention of taking action again, he got up tremblingly. Although it had had its teeth pulled out and its palm pierced by Zhang Chuan before, its physical strength was undeniable, and he could recover from such injuries in just one day at most. Zhang Chuan looked at the majestic appearance of the golden-haired Tiger King, and then looked at the azure fish python that had just stopped bleeding after falling to the ground. Then he decisively chose the golden retriever Tiger King, just as he raised his hand to push down the opponent's body so that he could easily jump onto his back. The golden-haired Tiger King was like a frightened bird. Before Zhang Chuan could take action, the entire tiger body had already fallen to the ground obediently, like a well-behaved big cat. Seeing this scene, Zhang Chuan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and sneered. "This is the first time that this holy sun has seen such a cowardly tiger." After saying that, he jumped onto the back of the golden Tiger King, stepped on it with his feet to make sure the hair was smooth enough, and then sat down cross-legged. Then Zhang Chuan reached out and gestured to Luo Yue, gesturing for her to come up and sit with him. Luo Yue also compared the blue fish python with the golden-haired Tiger King under Zhang Chuan, and finally jumped on the tiger's back. However, the area on the tiger's back was very large. As if she disliked the strong smell of blood on Zhang Chuan, Luo Yue found a seat 2 meters away from Zhang Chuan and sat down. Seeing both Zhang and Chuan sit down on the back of the golden-haired Tiger King, the azure fish python used its snake tail to tidy up the large and small baggage on its head. For a moment, it felt that it had fallen out of favor, and at the same time, its eyes looked at the golden retriever Tiger King with a bit of unkindness. Along the way, it has been inseparable from Zhang Chuan, and during this period, it was subtly nourished by the true dragon bloodline in Zhang Chuan's body. Azure fish python even feels that it won't be long before he can understand the true meaning of transforming into a dragon. Azure fish python still understands the principle of survival of the fittest. Although it can still resist the burden and so on now, if other beast kings are subdued by adults in the future, then it will most likely be outclassed by other beast kings. When the time comes, it will be useless, and it will be a small matter if you are abandoned by the adults. It will be a big deal if you cannot get nourishment from the true dragon blood from the adults. Zhang Chuan reached out and patted the golden-haired Tiger King's head and said, "Get up, which is the beast king's territory closest to the 100 Beasts Mountain?" Hearing this, the golden-haired Tiger King stood up tremblingly and walked out of the cave very consciously. As he walked, he replied, "Sir, the closest place to this place is King Crocodile's Misty Mountain Swamp." But as soon as it finished speaking, it saw the afterimage of a pile of baggage on its head passing by and rushing out. That look was simply more positive than rushing to reincarnate. Seeing this, the golden-haired Tiger King couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then quickly followed him. The penetrating injury on the sole of the foot did not have a great impact on its running, but the wound had already condensed into a scab after a while. Looking at the people who fell to the ground and howled along the way, the golden Tiger King felt sad for a while, but unfortunately Zhongquan was so powerful that even it has now become a shame in their world of ferocious beasts. The Mount under human crotch. Feeling the shocked, confused, and mixed emotional gazes around him, the golden-haired Tiger King wished he could escape from this world alone. 3 days later, the Forbidden Spirit Realm fell into Dragon Valley. A huge palace made of huge stones stands in the middle of the valley. Compared to the cave of the Golden Retriever Tiger King and the lake of the Azure Fish Python, this palace is more than a bit more upscale. At this moment, a middle-aged man with horns was sitting on the main seat at the top of the palace. The opponent is the supreme leader of Falling Dragon Valley, King Zhao. The biggest difference between him and the Beast Kings in the Forbidden Spirit world is that he can take the body of a ferocious beast and transform into a human form. There is no other reason for this. Before he was imprisoned in the Forbidden Spirit Realm by the Zhang family, this Dragon King was a black wind dragon that could rival the human race's powerful realm. By a certain chance, he took the transformation grass and successfully transformed into a human form, and even used this to secretly devour humans in the human race city. In the end, because his identity was exposed, he was subdued by the powerful Zhang family and thrown into the Forbidden Spirit world to serve as the strongest beast in the trial of the younger generation of the Zhang family. Because his strength is much higher than the other 4 Beast Kings, Zhao King has always liked to be alone, and he used his absolute strength to occupy the valley with the most abundant resources and named it Dragon Falling Valley. And Falling Dragon Valley is not like other Beast Kings who only recruit similar ferocious beasts into their territory. Falling Dragon Valley recruits homeless and powerful ferocious beasts. Although this regulation made the Dragon Falling Valley a mixed bag, it greatly improved the overall strength of the Falling Dragon Valley. At this moment, the Zhao King was on the main seat, looking down from a high position, looking at the 2 wind shadow wolves that were trembling below and did not dare to raise their heads. I saw 2 wind shadow wolves looking outside the hall from time to time, howling in their mouths. After these roars reached King Zhao's ears, they were automatically transformed into human speech. Big, big, big. Big things. Go away, you can't speak clearly, let me do it. Lord Dragon King, things are going badly. The 4 Beast Kings from outside have invaded with 2 humans. You fart. What I saw was clearly 2 humans rushing in with the 4 Beast Kings in hand. King Zhao couldn't help but feel confused when he heard the arguments in his mind. Then he took a deep breath, crushed the armrest on his right, and said sternly, "Both idiots, get out of here." The terrifying sound shook the ears of the 2 wind shadow wolves. The 2 wolves howled miserably and turned around and ran towards the door of the palace. But suddenly, the howl became louder and louder. For some reason, King Zhao's heart suddenly tightened, and he suddenly raised his eyes and looked outside the palace. I saw an azure python appearing in the palace at some point, and the 2 wind shadow wolves that had been preparing to leave were now being squeezed in each other's bloody mouths. Then the azure fish python raised its head, and its howl suddenly stopped, as it swallowed the 2 wind shadow wolves wholeheartedly into its stomach. At the same time, a deafening sound suddenly came from the door of the hall. Immediately afterwards, under the shocked eyes of King Zhao, the main hall that he had spent decades building earlier was instantly blown to pieces by the sudden appearance of 4 Beast Kings. This is not the most outrageous thing. A young man from the human race with the energy of a dragon appeared behind the 4 Beast Kings, and without saying a word, he knocked out 4 pieces of gravel with a snap of his fingers. The gravel hit the 4 stone pillars in the hall accurately. The gravel, which was only the size of a palm, seemed to be endowed with infinite power, and the stone pillars were blown to pieces in the blink of an eye. As the stone pillars collapsed, the entire hall could no longer support it. Boom! A loud noise spread throughout the Falling Dragon Valley, and the vicious beast who didn't know the truth thought that the dragon was really going to fall from the Falling Dragon Valley. Smoke and dust were everywhere in the center of Falling Dragon Valley. Among the collapsed ruins, the figure of King Zhao crawled out from a pile of boulders, and his vicious eyes coldly swept over everyone present. Compared with the disgraced King Zhao, look at the Zhongquan group. At this moment, except for the azure fish python, which was too huge and was hit by the falling gravel, the other 2 and 3 beasts were not affected by the impact of the gravel under the Eagle King's steel wings. King Zhao panted heavily and said angrily to the 4 Beast Kings in front of him, "What on earth do you guys mean? You guys and I have always stayed within our reach, and now you are helping the human race to attack my territory." After that, he looked up to the sky and roared, and suddenly a mist rose from under him. King Zhao's entire figure was gradually wrapped in thick fog, and everyone could only vaguely see faint black shadows in the fog. Zhang Chuan narrowed his eyes and urged his huge spiritual power like the sea to penetrate into the thick fog. I saw that the Zhao King no longer looked like a human being at this moment. The horns on his head became thicker and longer in an instant, and his limbs turned into sharp claws. The body began to lengthen continuously, and dark scales and hair quickly covered the whole body. In less than a few seconds, the Dragon King turned into a dark dragon and soared into the sky. Although the Zhao King is not as powerful as Zhang Chuan and has the blessing of true dragon blood, Zhao Long still has the word, dragon, in it. As the lord of all races, the dragon clan, even if it is a species that is even remotely related to it, will more or less suppress other ferocious beasts in terms of energy and blood power. This is the case for the 4 beast kings around Zhongchuan now. Under the pressure of King Zhao's blood, the faces of the beast kings are a little solemn. Seeing this situation, Zhang Chuan never changed his expression. He just stretched his waist, jumped on the back of the golden-haired Tiger King and said calmly, "You 3, go over and play with this little dragon." Naturally, the ones he mentioned were the Eagle King, the Crocodile King and the Azure Fish Python, in addition to the Tiger King. They didn't dare to have the slightest objection when they heard this, and then they looked at each other and rushed towards King Zhao with fierce eyes. Among them, the Azure Fish Python was at the forefront. The whole snake body turned into a blue lightning, and through the sloping wall in the ruins, the snake body soared into the sky. The Eagle King and Crocodile King who were behind always maintained the same speed, but they couldn't help but look at the Azure Fish Python with a hint of ridicule. The adults had said before that they were just letting them go up there for fun, but when something happened, this guy really did it. Why don't you even see if you can beat them? The Zhao King's strength is a huge level beyond them. If only recklessness could win, they would have dethroned King Zhao long ago. But the Azure Fish Python doesn't care about so much. This is not only the best time to show off in front of Zhang Chuan, but it is also its fateful duel. When Zhao King first came to the Forbidden Spirit Realm, he seemed to be on the same level as other beast kings. The Azure Fish Python's body shot out quickly, opening its bloody mouth and preparing to take a bite out of Zhao King's dragon tail. The Zhao King reacted before the opponent's fangs arrived, and swept the celestial fish python's face with a dragon tail. A shocking scene happened in the next second. I saw the Azure Fish Python bite the Zhao King's tail without any deviation, and the huge impact of the dragon's tail could not stop it from biting. The 2 sharp teeth on the upper jaw pierced the flesh and blood of the Zhao King's tail. The Zhao King looked up to the sky and roared angrily, a cold light flashed in his pupils. It suddenly raised a jet-black dragon claw and slapped it hard on the back of the Azure Fish Python. The cruel look in his eyes was intense, as if he didn't care whether the other party would tear a piece of flesh from his body. The other side was hit by a powerful and heavy dragon claw, and the entire snake body of the Azure Fish Python suddenly bowed, its scales burst, and blood splashed out like pillars. At the same time, it clenched its upper and lower jaws tightly, taking away a large piece of flesh and blood from the opponent the moment it was shot away. The celestial fish python smashed to the ground with its badly injured body, which had been torn apart, causing the ruins of the originally collapsed palace to sink several meters again. In the sky, King Zhao looked at the tail where the skin and flesh had been separated, and he was furious for a moment. Before the Eagle King and Crocodile King could rush forward, it moved its body and took the initiative to kill towards the opposite side with the force of breaking through the air. At the same time, a dragon roar came from the mouth of Zhao King, and the pressure of qi and blood on his body became stronger and stronger, forcing the 2 beasts of Eagle King to retreat several meters subconsciously. But the strange thing is that I don't know whether it is because the Eagle King and Crocodile King are strong, or the Zhao King was weakened by the method of hurt for injury by the Azure Fish Python. The 3 of them were at each other's throats for a while, and they were inseparable. Fight all the way from the sky to the ground, and then from the ground to the sky. When Zhang Chuan saw this scene, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but evoke an intriguing look. Seeing Luo Yue's absence, she already had other ideas for him who was alone. Then Zhang Chuan stood up slowly, stamped the golden-haired Tiger King's head with his foot and said, You go up too, don't waste this holy sun's time. After hearing this, the opponent's huge tiger head nodded, then leaned down to let Zhang Chuan leave from its back, and then flew into the battlefield. But before the golden-haired Tiger King came to the battlefield, the voice of the Eagle King suddenly sounded in its mind. Tiger King, this human just wants us to kill each other. You must not fall into their trap. Have you never thought about why the other party asked the four of us to consume the Zhao King? The opponent must not be strong enough to take down the Zhao King, so he wants to unite to conquer us and work for him. Maybe after we both lose, the humans will take the opportunity to kill us. Hearing this, the golden retriever Tiger King couldn't help but slow down. The Eagle King's analysis seemed completely unreasonable to it. It still remembers how Zhang Chuan destroyed its body like a devil 3 days ago. That feeling was 100 times more terrifying than that of Zhao King, and it didn't want to experience it a second time. The Eagle King and the Crocodile King were all subdued by him and the Azure Fish Python, and he still has no respect for Zhang Chuan at all. On the other side, the Eagle King was overjoyed when he saw the Tiger King stop, thinking that the Tiger King was as willing to join forces with them as the Azure Fish Python. Yes, just now it also used spiritual consciousness to communicate with the Azure Fish Python, and the other party agreed without saying a word. Now that the 5 Beast Kings are gathered together, will they still be afraid of a human who can't even use weapons and spiritual energy? Eagle King and Zhao King looked at each other, then immediately understood and stopped their original pretentious fight. Immediately afterwards, the two took the Crocodile King and turned around and rushed towards Zhang Chuan's position. But suddenly, something beyond their expectations happened. The Tiger King and the Azure Fish Python rushed towards the Eagle King in the opposite direction without hesitation, with an unyielding momentum, as if Zhang Chuan was their reborn father. Tiger King, Python King, are you too crazy? Do you know what you are doing now? That human being is our common enemy. The sharp voice of the Eagle King roared out from his mouth. It never expected that the Python King and Tiger King, who had readily agreed before, would rebel in the blink of an eye. What kind of ecstasy soup did that human pour into them? But now the Eagle King couldn't control so much, and immediately called on the Crocodile King to stop the two traitors with him. On the other hand, King Zhao swung his tail and instantly turned into a black lightning, heading straight towards Zhang Chuan. Human, your biggest mistake is to challenge this king alone. Today, my king will let you understand that if you dare to challenge a strong person, you will only die. The dragon whiskers around King Zhao's mouth kept flying, and his whole big mouth actually curved, and he smiled ferociously at Zhang Chuan. At the same time, it pressed all its own energy and blood towards Zhang Chuan's head. Zhang Chuan's expression remained unchanged, as if he had never cared about the terrifying pressure unleashed by the other party. I saw him with his hands behind his back, walking slowly towards him in front of King Zhao, raising the corners of his lips and smiling softly as he walked. How can a frog at the bottom of a well dare to look at the sky? It's ridiculous. As soon as Zhang Chuan said this, he seemed to have stabbed a wound deep in King Zhao's heart, causing it to bleed. Since King Zhao was captured here by the Zhang family, he has spent countless years there, watching the moon rise and set. In its heart, it still longs to escape from this cage-like world and go to a wider world. But as time went by, even after searching the entire Forbidden Spirit realm, they could not find an exit for the vicious beast to leave this place, and its illusions had to be shattered. Now that Zhang Chuan mentioned it as a way to laugh at it, King Zhao suddenly became furious, and his dark dragon body trembled violently, as if the anger he had accumulated for many years was finally about to explode at this moment. You deserve to die, King Zhao roared and hissed. Then it stretched out its dragon claws and pressed down on Zhang Chuan's thin body with all its strength. Faced with the same blow that seriously injured the Azure Fish Python, Zhang Chuan's face showed no expression. He raised his hand to expose the palm of his hand, and then quickly clenched it. What? King Zhao's pupils shrank suddenly and he exclaimed. For a moment, it couldn't believe its eyes. The other party actually blocked its full blow with one hand. One of Zhao King's fingers was held tightly by Zhang Chuan, and the barb-like nails were easily broken by him. It seemed that the broken nail had touched a nerve, and the pain from his fingers to his heart made King Zhao howl in agony. Taking advantage of the opponent's attention being distracted, Zhang Chuan stepped forward and swung his arms forward. The huge body of Zhao King flew out instantly. How it flew here before, now it flies back at the same speed. On the other side, the Eagle King, who was fighting with the golden-haired Tiger King, was hit by a sudden missile, without paying attention, and was smashed into the ruins together. Zhang Chuan's eyes wandered between the golden-haired Tiger King and the azure fish python, and then said calmly, "You two, please step back." The two looked at each other after hearing this, and immediately nodded and left the main battlefield. Then Zhangchuan Senen's eyes were fixed on the Crocodile King. Without waiting for the opponent to react, he jumped up to the opponent and kicked him on the head of the Crocodile King with a side kick, causing both of them to wail. Zhang Chuan ducked in front of the three Beast Kings again, with dragon-like energy and blood rushing into the sky, and the terrifying real dragon breath seemed to be coming from the 9 heavens. "Who are you?" After King Zhao said that, he spat out a mouthful of blood, his breath weak. Although the Eagle King and the Crocodile King did not react as strongly as the Zhao King, they were still suppressed by the pressure of the dragon roar from the 9 heavens and did not dare to move. Zhang Chuan's eyes were the first to stop on King Zhao's sluggish face, and he couldn't help but sneered. "Who am I? No one has asked me this question in a long time. Don't you want to kill me? Today the Holy Son of Japan is standing here for you to kill. Do you dare?" Hearing this, King Zhao's face began to twitch uncontrollably. After hearing the word, "Holy Son," spoken by the other party, the last trace of courage in his heart was wiped out. If the Holy Son of the Zhang family dies in the Forbidden Spirit Realm, let alone it, then the entire ferocious beasts in the Forbidden Spirit Realm will bear the wrath of the Zhang family. The longer you live, the more you cherish your life, and the same is true for King Zhao. Faced with Zhang Chuan's provocative words, King Zhao was trembling and did not dare to make any move at this moment. But after doing so, the result of waiting for it was that the huge dragon head was blown open by Zhang Chuan's punch. Zhang Chuan shook his blood-stained fist and said, "You're useless even if I give you a chance." Looking at the body of the dragon that collapsed to the ground, Eagle King felt his heart go cold and his body shivered even more violently. Zhang Chuan turned his gaze to Eagle King and asked calmly, "What about you?" After witnessing the previous tragic situation of King Zhao, King Eagle took a deep breath, gritted his teeth and climbed up from the ground and rushed towards Zhangchuan to kill him. But the immediate response was a light punch, and the Eagle King's body exploded. When it was the turn of the last Crocodile King, the opponent had already been scared out of his wits by Zhang Chuan, and he lay on the ground and cried out, "I wish." Before it could finish speaking, Zhang Chuan punched him again, silencing him permanently. Wisps of light drifted out from the body of the dead Beast King, gradually forming a huge light door behind it. After Zhang Chuan did not rush to enter this teleportation portal, there was no news about Luo Yue, who was currently going to rob the Dragon Falling Valley treasure house alone, so he planned to wait for him first. After stopping to look at the teleportation portal for a while, he turned to look at the azure fish python and the golden-haired Tiger King who were resting in place just after the battle, with a flash of thought in his eyes. Suddenly being stared at by Zhang Chuan's gaze, they felt as if they were falling into an ice cave. They all saw the terrifying scene where the opponent punched a Beast King just now. They were now afraid that Zhangchuan would kill them again and continue to kill 5 more with them. Although there was no breath coming out of Zhang Chuan's body, at this moment, the 2 Beast Kings, who were astonished in the Forbidden Spirit Realm, still couldn't help but crouch on the ground, not daring to meet each other's eyes. Zhang Chuan couldn't help but feel amused when he saw the trembling respectful expressions of the 2 in front of him. Then he seemed to remember something, and activated his mental power to transmit the images of several Zhang family disciples into the minds of the azure fish python and the golden-haired Tiger King. "Sir, this..." Before they could express their doubts, they felt as if their minds had been hit by a sledgehammer, and their consciousness instantly became blurry. Immediately afterwards, black mist began to pour into their minds, and in less than a moment, their consciousness was wiped out. Looking at those 2 pairs of empty pupils, Zhang Chuan raised a cold smile on his lips and said lightly, "Now Falling Dragon Valley, Wushan Swamp and Tengchi Peak are all unclaimed lands. It's up to you how much you can swallow." Quote, "As for those people, after you return, immediately send your men to search the entire Forbidden Spirit Realm. If they see them, they can be executed on the spot." What he just transmitted through his mental power were the people on the list Zhang Shuyuan gave him. Although it has been 3 days since everyone came to the Forbidden Spirit Realm, after understanding the rules of the Forbidden Spirit Realm, there are definitely still most people who stay in it and want to get more resources to take away. Upon hearing this, the blue fish python and the golden-haired tiger king immediately accepted the order, turned around, and began to run away with their blood and essence burning. Watching the snake and the tiger leave, Zhang Chuan's eyes flashed with a glint. In fact, he never thought of letting go of the 5 beast kings from the beginning. Now that he has raided the territories of all the beast kings in the Forbidden Spirit Realm, there is no need to keep the remaining beast kings. It is better to let them use their last remaining heat to help eradicate those Zhang family children who cannot be dealt with by themselves. After waiting for a moment, Zhang Chuan suddenly frowned. When searching the territories of other beast kings a few days ago, Luo Yue could almost always make it back as soon as the battle was over. But this time, after such a long time, Zhang Chuan didn't even see the shadow of the other party. He didn't expect Luo Yue to be in danger. Except for the Zhao King who was killed by him with one punch before, he could almost walk sideways in the Forbidden Spirit Realm with his strength. And with the blessing of luck, even King Zhao may not be Luo Yue's opponent in one-on-one situations. Now that the other party has not returned, Zhang Chuan always feels that things are out of his control. He tried to use the Golden Dragon Ring to lock Luo Yue's position, but found that the other party was no longer within the 10-mile radius that the Golden Dragon Ring could sense. Zhang Chuan's eyes flashed, and then he remembered that Luo Yue had carried away all the baggage, large and small, before leaving today. In this case, there is only one possibility. Luo Yue has left the Forbidden Spirit World with the spiritual grass and elixir she obtained. There is no way the other party is stupid enough to wander around carrying so many things. Zhang Chuan took a deep breath. He felt that he should have been careful about Luo Yue before. Nowadays, there is not much problem in the trial of the ancestral land, but if Luo Yue, the girl of luck, stirs up any trouble outside, she may not be able to find the other party. After confirming that Luo Yue left alone, Zhang Chuan stopped waiting and walked towards the teleportation portal. But just when he was about to step into the door with half his foot, he frowned and stopped in place. The system's announcement suddenly echoed through Zhang Chuan's mind. Ding! The contract partner Luo Yue successfully absorbed the octagonal Xuanian grass and gained the power of Xuanian. 10,000 times return trigger. The host obtains the Xuanian holy body. With the blessing of the system acceleration package, Zhang Chuan successfully absorbed the Xuanian holy body in just one moment of closing and opening his eyes. But what followed was that half of the body was boiling like a sea of fire, and half was like a world of ice and snow. Two extreme but mutually exclusive forces kept colliding, melting, and condensing within his body. The pain caused by the 2 layers of ice and fire made Zhang Chuan groan, supported his body, walked into the portal and disappeared. Zhang Chuan only felt that he had slept for a long, long time, and he seemed to be able to feel the collision of 2 forces in his sleep. The 2 top physiques were constantly fighting in his body, but they were still unable to do anything to each other. Just when the 2 sides were in a stalemate, a ball of black and white gas enveloped them instantly. The 2 physiques in Zhang Chuan's body seemed to have been guided, like 2 men and women who had tasted forbidden fruit for the first time, and gradually began to blend in and out of shyness. When he opened his eyes again, he found that the 2 physiques actually used the yin-yang scroll as a bridge to neutralize each other and not be affected by it. It even felt like a magpie bridge looking at each other. At the same time, his realm has been raised to 2 smaller realms again under the 10,000 times return, and he has reached the 7th layer heaven, the realm of great power. Zhang Chuan tried to activate the newly acquired Xuanian holy body. He opened his palms and a bunch of light gray Xuanian energy floated out from his palm. Then the burning heaven holy body seemed to feel something and started to move together. Let the Zan Yin Qi gradually turn into the shape of flames. At the same time, the originally cold Xuanian Qi actually felt warm in his hands, just like no matter how cold a person's heart is, his is also warm. Slowly closing his palms, the Zan Yin Qi immediately dissipated and returned to Zhang Chuan's body. Only then did Zhang Chuan have time to observe the environment he was in now. I saw him slowly scanning the surroundings with his eyes, and then found that he had once again returned to the corridor when he first entered the ancestral land trial. But now this corridor should extend all the way, because right behind Zhongquan is the familiar black and white stone gate. But this time it is different from before. From the current point of view, Zhongquan is really the only one in this corridor. Zhang Chuan looked forward, but this corridor was not like before, with torches acting as light sources to broaden the vision. Now in this dark and humid corridor, Zhang Chuan must constantly stimulate his mental power to maintain his night vision. But even so, someone seemed to have set up a large formation inside the corridor, and Zhang Chuan's field of vision stopped at 50 meters away and could not move forward. Chapter 71. At this time, Zhang Chuan was not prepared to wait where he was, but walked straight towards the front of the corridor alone. It wasn't until he traveled 50 meters that the sound of howling wind came to his ears at an inappropriate time. Zhang Chuan did not continue walking forward. When he stopped, he glanced coldly at the wall on the right from the corner of his eye. In his field of vision, he saw a slender black shadow clinging to the wall, with the distance between it and him being less than 5 meters. At this moment, Zhongquan and Haiying were just staring at each other quietly, as if neither of them had the intention to take the initiative. The most fundamental reason why Zhang Chuan did not take action was because he realized that the black shadow in front of him was not real. The other party seems to be above the line between illusion and reality, making it difficult for people to see its appearance, but it is also like a projection emitted by a powerful person that allows people to feel the true state of cultivation. But this is what puzzles Zhongquan the most. The realm of the black shadow is too weak for him. Ida is just the realm of the fourth layer of the dragon transformation realm. After realizing this, Zhongquan planned to see what the other party's methods were. I saw him standing there with his hands behind his back, as if signaling the other person to hit him in the chest. As expected, the black shadow seemed to be unable to hold on any longer, and pointed at Zhongquan. The blade intent burst into the sky, and a force that could kill everything came towards Zhongquan. One finger across the river. Zhang Chuan said in surprise. Could it be that this is the projection left by the genius of his Zhang family who entered the ancestral land for trials many years ago? At the same time, facing the attack that was about to hit his chest in the next second, Zhang Chuan remained calm and stretched out his finger. After being touched by Zhang Chuan's fingertips, the blade intent began to be overwhelmed and instantly shattered and dissipated. The black shadow remained silent, and then he stretched out his hand and grasped it in the void, and a pair of swords were actually taken into his hands out of thin air. Seeing this scene, Zhang Chuan raised his eyebrows. Can the projection here even reproduce the weapons? He couldn't help but become interested for a moment, took out the wandering dragon sword from the fingers of the universe ring and held it in his hand. The black shadow held 2 knives in his hands, and moved the back of the knife together with the blade slowly, sparks bursting out. At the same time, the momentum around the black shadow began to surge, and the raging sword force surged out like an endless river. At this moment, the entire black shadow seemed to turn into a sword that cut the sky and split the earth. Seeing this scene, even Zhongquan couldn't help but marvel at the opponent's accomplishments in the way of the sword. He could condense the blade intent into the force of the sword with just the dragon transformation realm. Although Zhang Chuan was also in the dragon transformation realm when he turned his sword intention into sword power, the biggest reason is because he had 3,000 Dao bones to help him quickly comprehend various divine ability secrets, which made him worthy of being in the dragon transformation realm. Sword power. If it is said that the true master of the Black Shadow also has a top-notch cultivation physique with 3,000 Dao bones, Zhang Chuan will never believe it. He can only say that the other party is born to be a monster in the way of swordsmanship. It was late at first, then fast, before Zhang Chuan could react, the Black Shadow on the opposite side suddenly took action. 2 shocking sword lights were slashed out by it, and the terrifying sword power swept over, like a rushing wild beast that made the surrounding void tremble and twist. This blow has obviously broken through the scope of the 4th layer of the dragon transformation realm. In Zhongquan's view, it can even reverse the 7th layer of the dragon transformation realm. Facing these shocking swords, Zhang Chuan raised his right hand expressionlessly, and a cold light burst out from the front of the dragon sword. Then he just lightly slashed out a sword, and the sword light instantly illuminated the entire corridor, easily tearing apart 2 sword lights with unparalleled power. And with undiminished power, it instantly passed through the black figure's waist and cut it in half. Under Zhang Chuan's gaze, the severed black shadow was replaced by black mist and slowly dissipated into the ground beneath his feet. As the black shadow disappeared, the 50-meter corridor behind Zhang Chuan suddenly lit up. He glanced around and found that the light source actually came from the ground under his feet. Finally, Zhang Chuan focused his attention on the wall to his right. After the black shadow dissipated, a line of writing began to appear on the wall. Zhang Hong. Zhang Chuan read out the name on the wall in a low voice. It turned out that the black shadow before was named Zhang Hong, but Zhang Chuan searched the memories in his mind, but did not remember that a swordsman genius named Zhang Hong had appeared in the Zhang family in the past 1,000 years. I guess he must have been a person from thousands of years ago. Zhang Chuan murmured to himself. But for a moment, the word, Zhang Hong, on the wall began to gradually blur and flash, as if to remind Zhang Chuan to cover the other person's name with his own name. Looking at the still dim corridor ahead, Zhang Chuan couldn't help but guess that there must be a more powerful projection behind him. Now that he was carving his name here, he didn't know if he could move forward again, so he simply ignored the flashing writing on the wall and walked straight ahead. In less than a quarter of an hour, Zhang Chuan had already traveled 300 meters in the corridor, during which he defeated the projections of 4 early Zhang family geniuses. At the same time, he also discovered that the further he walked forward, the clearer the projection appeared in front of him. When he met the 5th projection, Zhang Chuan could even vaguely see the opponent's facial features. At the same time, the opponent's realm had reached the 7th layer of Dragon Transformation Realm. If it weren't for Zhang Chuan's 10,000 times return system, with his cultivation level of the 3rd layer of the Dragon Transformation Realm a month ago, there would be no way he could be his opponent. Looking up at the still dim corridor ahead, Zhang Chuan's mood finally changed. You must know that the projection that you just fought against is already able to fight against the monks in the powerful realm without falling behind in terms of overall strength. What about the subsequent projection? Could it be that we have reached the point where we can defeat the mighty in reverse? Zhang Chuan became more and more interested in the trial in this ancestral land, and he couldn't help but look forward to whether the projection behind it would make his eyes shine. I saw him taking a step forward skillfully, and then there were footsteps in the dark corridor ahead. As the footsteps of pat 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 got closer and closer, a figure slowly emerged from the darkness. After seeing the other person's facial features in full, Zhang Chuan froze on the spot. I saw the projection of white clothes fluttering, sword-shaped eyebrows and starry eyes, and a handsome face with sharp edges under the flowing long hair. And that face is actually 70% similar to his father, Zhang Shiren, and at the same time, there is an invincible aura around him. Zhang Chuan could conclude in his heart that the other person was Zhang Shiren. How could he not recognize a person who had memories from childhood to adulthood? I have to say that this projection really made his eyes light up. No matter how much he thought about it, he never imagined that his father would actually become the projection of the ancestral land trial. To put it this way, when Zhang Shiren was young, he was definitely comparable to the one who is ranked number 1 on today's Pride list. My father has really hidden his secrets. Zhang Chuan and Zhang Shiren both stood there and looked at each other from a distance. The two of them narrowed their eyes in tacit understanding, with fighting intent bursting out of their eyes at the same time. Next, it was the turn of the father-son game. Zhang Shiren stepped forward, an extremely violent momentum erupted from his body, and invisible waves of spiritual energy rolled towards the river. The pinnacle of the Dragon Transformation Realm. Zhang Chuan could clearly feel the opponent's specific cultivation level, and at the same time, the violent aura rushing towards him was even more impressive than that of a monk in the middle stage of the powerful realm. The next second, Zhang Shiren moved. He drew out a long sword without any delay and swept across Zhang Chuan. At the same time, his wrist suddenly shook, and the sword in his hand struck 4 times in the direction of Zhang Chuan like a spear. 4 sword energies burst out at the same time, sealing off Zhang Chuan's dodge space. Even though Zhang Shiren just waved 5 swords casually, it contained the artistic conception of simplification from complexity. Each sword energy is equivalent to dozens of times the full blow of the sword demon Zhang Hong. The sword energy also contained unparalleled sword power. The sharp and terrifying sword power cut open the surrounding space unscrupulously, truly achieving the ability to shuttle through space. Facing the sword energy that could easily kill the mighty realm, Zhang Chuan's expression did not change, and then he actually turned over his hand and put away the wandering dragon sword in his hand. He just punched forward with his bare hands. The sound of howling wind passed through his ears, and the powerful punch that swallowed mountains and rivers hit the void in front of Zhang Chuan. There was only a click sound, and the space in front of him was almost cracked by the punch. And those sword energies were like rabbits waiting for rabbits, and they were killed by Zhang Chuan's fist. The collision between the two made a huge noise, like a tide of beasts rushing past, making the entire corridor tremble, and the dust accumulated for many years above the head was scattered to the ground. Zhang Chuan slowly retracted his hand and narrowed his eyes when he saw the white marks on the surface of his fist scratched by the sword energy. Although he only used his physical strength just now, he did not hold back. As a result, the sword energy struck by Zhang Xiren could actually touch his fist. As expected of you, Dad. In terms of swordsmanship, even if I have a sword spirit body, I'm still not as good as you. Zhang Chuan didn't care whether the other party could reply or not. He raised his head and said with a half-smile expression on his face. As soon as he finished speaking, he stepped forward and once again used his bare hands to scatter the incoming divine ability secret technique. Due to the huge disparity in strength, all the moves thrown by Zhang Xiren were useless to Zhang Chuan. It only took him a breathless time to appear in front of Zhang Xiren. He saw his right hand clawed into the opponent's neck, and then he leaned forward and pressed down suddenly, knocking him to the ground. Boom! Along with the deafening noise, a small pit was suddenly smashed into the ground in the corridor, and spider-web-shaped cracks began to spread at the foot of Zhang Chuan. Zhang Xiren's head fell into the pothole, and he didn't seem to be seriously injured. However, the opponent didn't seem to be affected by Zhang Chuan's blow. The movements in his hands did not pause at all, and he raised his sword and prepared to attack Zhang Chuan, who was close at hand. Sooner or later, Zhang Chuan seemed to have predicted Zhang Xiren's attack, and struck the opponent's sword-holding wrist with another punch. The unrivaled power gathered into one point, denting and twisting the opponent's wrist. His palm uncontrollably loosened, and the long sword flew out of his hand. Obviously this was an extremely painful thing, but Zhang Xiren remained expressionless. Seeing this scene, Zhang Chuan couldn't help but raise his brows. Previously, he was suppressed by absolute strength and killed with a sword. He also didn't expect that the projection could ignore pain. This alone would allow it to continuously expand its advantage in battle. If Zhang Chuan hadn't swept all the way with a crushing level gap, I'm afraid every projection he encountered would have brought him varying degrees of trouble. Looking at Zhang Xiren, who was suppressed by him and unable to move, Zhang Chuan's eyes became a little more interested, and then he sneered. I'm sorry, Dad. As soon as the words fell, Zhang Chuan suddenly raised his foot and stepped on the other person's chest, and the sound of clicking, the ribs was broken. Then he bent down and punched Zhang Xiren in the face several times. The speed of the punches could no longer be described as fast as an afterimage. Zhang Chuan's fist seemed to always stay at the top, but the increasingly downward sinking holes under his body showed how violent the impact Zhang Xiren was enduring. Although it was always unfilial to beat his father so violently, Zhang Chuan still wanted to test his father's limits. As Zhang Chuan's fists fell like raindrops, Zhang Xiren, under him suddenly burst out with a domineering and boundless terrifying aura that seemed to be above the common people. With the momentum rising, Zhang Chuan pulled back and stood not far away and began to quietly observe the changes in the opponent's body. I saw Zhang Xiren getting up from the ground, and his right hand that had been broken by Zhang Chuan was repairing quickly at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was a faint purple light flashing in it, and a strong and powerful aura was revealed. At the same time, a mysterious and unpredictable totem emerged behind him. The totem depicts a strange beast with a dragon head, a snake tail, white tiger claws, phoenix wings, unicorn armor, and a black tortoise back, giving it a sense of invincibility and contempt for the world. This is Kanglong Tyrant Body. Zhang Chuan was secretly shocked. According to rumors, the Kanglong Tyrant Body is tied with the ancient immortal body, and it is also among the best among many top-level physiques. After the great accomplishment, the Azure Dragon Tyrant Body is even more powerful than the Great Emperor. The Azure Dragon Tyrant blood it sheds has the power to extend life and heal injuries, and is regarded as a great medicine in the world. Now that it has reached this point, although Zhang Chuan had some guesses about his father's strength, the appearance of the Kenglong Tyrant body still exceeded his expectations. Zhang Xiren had never mentioned or used this physique in front of him, and he had never heard of the rumor that the head of the Zhang family had the Kenglong body. This undoubtedly makes Zhang Xiren, the #1 young person of the previous generation, once again shrouded in mystery. Before Zhang Chuan could think again, Zhang Xiren had already moved in front of him in an instant, and struck Zhang Chuan's chest with a punch carrying the roaring momentum of mountains and rivers. It seemed that he wanted to avenge Zhang Chuan for knocking him to the ground earlier. When Zhang Chuan was hit and flew backwards, he had no intention of stopping. Stepping forward, Zhang Xiren waved his fists, punching to the flesh. Almost every punch hit Zhang Chuan's chest, driving half of his body into the wall. Zhang Chuan could feel the burning pain coming from his chest. When he looked down, he found that the clothes on his chest were torn and several white marks were scratched on the surface of his skin. His eyes were like lightning. After catching the opponent's next move, he suddenly pulled his right hand out of the wall, quickly stopped it in front of him, and wrapped the incoming fist in the palm of his hand. At the same time, the other hand also reached out and latched onto the wrist of Zhang Xiren. Black and gold flames burst out from the palms of both hands, and the power of extreme heat and cold swept through the entire corridor. Zhang Chuan's mouth curled up and he said, "Dad, have you had enough trouble?" Half an hour later, it was already bright in the corridor where Zhang Chuan was. He flicked his aching wrist and looked down at the Zhang Xiren, whose head was cut off by him and gradually dissipated. His heart stopped. Sometimes, for his own benefit, whether he is a relative or a close friend, he can be the one he takes advantage of. Since he came to this world, Zhang Chuan has never thought about living the life of a young master in mediocrity. After having the system, his goal is the vast sky, the opportunity to become an immortal, and to be the first emperor across all eternity. On the wall in front of Zhang Chuan, the word, Zhang Xiren, began to flash violently, just like the several projections Zhang Chuan had encountered before. He turned his head and looked at the front of the corridor. This time, there was no dim corridor extending outward. Now there was only an open giant bronze door in front of him. After hesitating for a moment, Zhang Chuan finally carved his name on the wall, covering the words, Zhang Xiren. As the original word, Zhang Xiren, on the wall gradually faded away, the word, Zhangchuan, seemed to be plated with a layer of gold, still exuding a dazzling brilliance in the bright corridor. The old king falls a and a new king takes the throne. This seems to be the alternation of two eras, and it also heralds the beginning of the next golden age. Let those who come after you stop here forever. Zhang Chuan reached out and rubbed his name, murmuring in his mouth. Zhang Chuan didn't think there was anything wrong with what he did. The weak were always worthy of surrendering at the feet of the strong. As for where he would go again after entering the giant bronze gate through this corridor, he didn't care. There is a saying that force can defeat all laws. As long as he is strong enough, all difficulties will naturally be solved. Thinking in his heart, Zhang Chuan had already stepped into the giant bronze door. The spatial confusion he expected, or the dizziness that made one's vision go black, did not come. Because behind the giant bronze door, there is indeed a space. Zhang Chuan stood there and looked around, only to see that he was now in a huge palace made of crystal. A crystal pillar stood quietly in the center of the palace, with a 7-color crystal ball with a flowing halo at the top. Just when Zhang Chuan started to become curious about the crystal ball, opposite him, there was also a huge bronze door that slowly opened. Within a few seconds, a woman in a white dress with an unparalleled appearance quickly walked in from behind the door. Seeing the visitor, Zhang Chuan couldn't help but frown and whispered to himself, Luo Yue. He never expected that the other party could enter behind the giant bronze door at the same time as himself. Logically speaking, Luo Yue's 6th layer realm is there, and even when she entered the ancestral land trial in the early years, the woman's strength would be relatively weaker. But if Luo Yue wants to deal with the projection in the corridor, it will definitely take a lot of time. On the other side, Luo Yue stepped into the palace seemingly calmly, but in fact she was confused inside. She remembered that she had been fighting with a second-layer genius from the dragon transformation realm 1,000 years ago, but suddenly her eyes went dark, and her body seemed to be pushed forward by some mysterious force. When she opened her eyes again, there was only an open giant bronze door standing in front of her. The moment she entered the door, Luo Yue spotted Zhang Chuan opposite her. She did not expect that the two of them would meet again less than a day apart. The reason why she left without saying goodbye was that she still couldn't trust Zhang Chuan unconditionally. After all, who knew whether the Zhang family's ancestral land would block the way of heaven during the trial? For Luo Yue, it is absolutely right to be cautious. But now she has already pocketed the spiritual herbs and elixirs obtained from the forbidden spirit realm, and even the 8 Anis Xuanian grass has been absorbed by her and turned into the power of Xuanian. It is already impossible for Zhang Chuan to take it back from her. At this moment, the two of them stood at one end of the palace and looked at each other from a distance. Luo Yue did not choose to dodge, but collided with the other's gaze. I didn't expect that we would meet again by such a coincidence, Luo Yue said with a faint smile on her face. As her words fell, Zhang Chuan on the opposite side also made a move in the next second. Zhang Chuan arrived in front of Luo Yue in a few flashes, then slowly leaned down and stopped when the distance between their noses was less than 5 centimeters. It is indeed a coincidence, but when you left suddenly in the forbidden spirit realm earlier, were you afraid that I would go back and seize the treasure and go back on my word? Zhang Chuan just stared at Luo Yue, his eyes slowly narrowed into a slit. It seemed that as long as the other party said the wrong word, he might suddenly burst out and kill the other party. The hot breath that Zhang Chuan exhaled when he spoke hit Luo Yue's cheek, causing her smile to freeze. Then she put away her smile, lowered her eyes and explained in a low voice, I think you must have misunderstood. With the cooperative relationship between us, I naturally trust you. It's just that when I was searching for the treasure house of Fallen Dragon Valley, I accidentally fell into a small secret realm. When I came out again, you had already left the forbidden spirit realm. After listening to Luo Yue's explanation, Zhang Chuan blinked his eyes, seeming to be thinking about the truth or falsehood of the other party's words. Just when Luo Yue put her finger on the universe ring vigilantly, preparing to guard against Zhang Chuan's move, Zhang Chuan suddenly smiled, nodded and said, I see, then I misunderstood you, Yue. After that, he didn't care whether Luo Yue wanted to or not. He took the other person's little hand and walked straight towards the crystal pillar in the center of the palace. But what surprised Zhang Chuan was that Luo Yue didn't struggle much this time, and instead seemed a little well-behaved at the moment. This is not to say that Luo Yue has put down her guard against Zhang Chuan. The reason is very simple. The moment Zhang Chuan touched her palm, she could clearly feel that the power of earth fire, the power of Xuanian and even the 2 qi of yin and yang in her body were beginning to move. Now she is still busy using her Daoyuan immortal body to suppress those chaotic elements, and how can she care about such a trivial matter as being held by Zhang Chuan? The two stopped in front of the crystal pillar. Looking at it, the crystal column is 10 meters high, and the 7-color crystal ball at the top is spinning endlessly because I don't know where it gets its power. Zhang Chuan released Luo Yue's hand, and then tentatively reached out to touch the crystal pillar. The moment his palm touched the surface of the crystal column, the 7-color crystal ball at the top of the crystal column suddenly shone brightly. The two Zhangchuan people standing below subconsciously glanced aside. As the light bloomed, a handsome, domineering young man dressed in silver brocade clothes slowly emerged in the light emitted by the 7-color crystal ball, like a mirror in the water and the moon in the water. Not bad, it only took 500 years for someone to break into this place. The young man ruffled his hair on his temples with one hand, nodded and smiled happily. Zhang Chuan stared at the young man with a casual expression floating above him, and for a moment he felt that he looked too familiar. He couldn't help asking, are you from my Zhang family? From the other party's previous words, Zhang Chuan could tell that this was the same person who greeted his father here 500 years ago. In addition, although the figure manifested by the opponent at this moment is different from the projection encountered in the corridor, it is obviously not the true body. Judging from the young man's method, it is not an exaggeration to let Zhang Chuan use the honorific title for him. The young man smiled lightly. My name is Zhang Dowling. Zhang Dowling. After hearing this name, Zhang Chuan and Luo Yue were shocked at the same time. Almost everyone in Dongzhou knows this name. He is the unparalleled prodigy who used only his 2 fists to enter and exit the immortal restricted areas 10,000 years ago, and beat all the restricted areas to the point where they have been self-proclaimed for thousands of years. Silver Spirit Great Emperor. Only then did Zhang Chuan remember why he looked familiar to the other person. There was a statue of the other person in the Zhang family's family square. The projection in front of him now was obviously left by the Silver Spirit Great Emperor himself. Do you want to test the younger generations of the Zhang family who came here? Junior Zhangchuan, I have met the Great Emperor. While thinking in his heart, Zhang Chuan raised his hands and said, but his tone was not respectful at all. Hearing this, Yinling Great Emperor's eyes stayed on Zhangchuan for a moment, then he narrowed his eyes and nodded with a smile and asked. Zhang Chuan, who are you, that boy Zhang Shiren? Zhangchuan still maintained the posture of cupping his hands, and looked up curiously at the Silver Spirit Great Emperor. Silver Spirit Great Emperor actually knows his father. But then he thought about it and realized that 500 years ago, Zhang Shiren, like him, came to this crystal palace by defeating all the Zhang family's most talented and invincible opponents. It's my father. Zhang Chuan thought for a while and then replied. Hearing this, a glimmer of light flashed in the eyes of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor. The talents of your father and son are definitely among the top monsters even in my era. I didn't expect that in less than 1,000 years, the luck of my Zhang family would reach its peak again. The rise and fall of the Zhang family in this life will fall on the shoulders of you and your father. Zhang Chuan nodded and said, the words of the Great Emperor will be remembered by this junior generation. As his words fell, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor stretched out a finger and gently tapped the void in front of him. Suddenly, a group of light spots flickered at the tip of Silver Spirit Great Emperor's finger, becoming brighter and brighter as time went by. It wasn't until the diameter of the light group reached half a meter that he stopped what he was doing and controlled the light group to float above the palm of his hand. The Silver Spirit Great Emperor looked at the ball of light in his hand, and there seemed to be a hint of memory in his eyes. Then his voice sounded again, reaching the ears of Zhang and Chuan very clearly. Being able to get here means that you two have spent a lot of energy along the way, but I have good news and bad news to tell you. The good news is that I will pass on the divine ability, Emperor Fist, that I created in the Great Emperor realm to you, but the bad news is that you can only choose one person to accept my inheritance. Of course, if any of you can defeat me today, I will allow both of you to accept the inheritance. As he spoke, he turned his eyes to Zhang Chuan again. He didn't know what he thought of, but his eyes were full of smiles. Luo Yue on the other side couldn't help but frown slightly when she heard this. From the words of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor, she understood that the reason why she appeared here was most likely because of what Zhang Chuan had done in the previous corridor. What she couldn't figure out was, since only one person could accept the inheritance, why would the other party send her here? You must know that Emperor-grade skills or divine ability need to be engraved by the Great Emperor himself in order to be preserved in the world. Others cannot do it even if they want to tell them verbally. Now in terms of strength, he is definitely not as good as Zhangchuan, and it is impossible to defeat the Silver Spirit Great Emperor in his youth in battle. Even if she goes against Zhang Chuan and chooses herself, it is useless. The final decision still lies in the hands of Yinling Great Emperor. The other party must have hoped that Zhang Chuan, who was stronger and came from the same clan, would accept the inheritance, which would make Luo Yue redundant. Thinking in her heart, Luo Yue subconsciously looked at Zhangchuan. I saw the opponent standing with his hands behind his back, his eyes half closed, looking completely lazy and confident of winning. At this moment, she was even more convinced that Zhangchuan would definitely choose him. The divine ability created by the Great Emperor naturally reached the Emperor grade category, and it was impossible for the other party to let go of such a huge benefit. Have you decided on your choice? Silver Spirit Great Emperor reminded him again while playing with the light ball in his hand. I choose. Luo Yue was about to speak, but suddenly a hand pulled her back, causing her words to go back to her throat. Zhang Chuan grabbed Luo Yue's wrist, and under the other's puzzled gaze, he said calmly. We figured it out. Upon hearing this, Yinling's Great Emperor looked towards Zhangchuan but did not speak, as if he was waiting for the next step. We don't choose anyone. Today the Holy Son of Japan wants to take away the inheritance, so she must take it too. Zhongquan said calmly. As soon as these words came out, Silver Spirit Great Emperor seemed to have expected it, and there was no look of shock on his face. Instead, he threw the ball of light into the sky, clapped his hands and said with a smile. Very good, this is the current genius of our Zhang family. I might as well tell you that your father also chose this way back then. As he spoke, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor slowly descended to the ground and looked at Zhang Chuan with a smile. Hearing this, Zhang Chuan raised his eyebrows, and the corners of his mouth curved slightly as he said, "Oh, what's the final outcome?" The Silver Spirit Great Emperor stood on the spot, and as he breathed and breathed, a domineering and boundless aura was about to burst out, and all the cultivation levels of the second layer of the Great Power Realm were revealed. He looked at Zhongquan calmly, his lips moving slightly. He only lasted less than 10 moves in my hands. Do you still think you are sure to defeat me now? Feeling the powerful second layer cultivation level erupting from the opponent's body, Zhang Chuan knew that his father had not lost unjustly. The young Great Emperor who wants to fight against the Great Emperor at the peak of the Dragon Transformation Realm can only say that Zhang Shiren is worthy of being the owner of the Kenglong Tyrant body. He's really up for it. But Zhongquan's current state is not the peak of the Dragon Transformation Realm, but the peak of the Great Power Realm. Seeing that Zhongquan did not answer, Yinling Great Emperor did not show any anger and continued to say calmly. There is a watershed from the Dragon Transformation Realm to the Great Power Realm. With such a big gap in realm, you and I cannot make up for it with our combat power. Hearing this, Zhang Chuan gradually put away the smile on his face, and his stern eyes swept towards the Yinling Great Emperor unscrupulously. I saw him loosening his grip on Luo Yue's wrist, and then a gleam of light burst out from his eyes, and he took a step forward. Immediately afterwards, a whirlpool of spiritual energy began to form around Zhongquan. The strong wind blew his clothes with terrifying power, and there was a faint sound of dragon roars. The expression on Zhang Chuan's face was playful. He looked directly at the Yinling Great Emperor and said, "Great Emperor, who told you that this holy sun is also in the Dragon Transformation Realm?" At this moment, Luo Yue and even the Yinling Great Emperor looked towards Zhongquan in shock. No one would have thought that Zhang Chuan's cultivation level was comparable to that of the young Great Emperor. Luo Yue's eyes flickered, and she felt a vague sense of frustration towards Zhang Chuan in her heart. In her memory, Zhang Chuan in her previous life had such a fast cultivation speed. According to time calculation, it only took a month from the first time she met Zhang Chuan in this life. Is it really possible for people to advance from the early stage of Dragon Transformation Realm to the Great Power Realm in 1 month? Luo Yue remembers that Zhongquan in his previous life was only at the 6th layer level of the Dragon Transformation Realm at this time, referring to the previous life after the Ancestral Land trial. This was done only after the opponent had received many opportunities and accumulated more spiritual energy. Arrived. Could it be that his rebirth actually changed Zhang Chuan's life trajectory? Luo Yue suddenly felt a little numb, and the confidence in her heart was instantly wiped away at this moment. With the huge gap between the two realms, can I really catch up? On the other side, the Yinling Great Emperor was shocked, and was also surprised that Zhang Chuan could successfully condense the immortal platform and break through to great power when he was less than 100 years old. Don't look at the fact that he is a genius who lived thousands of years ago and possesses extraordinary talents. But the reason why he was able to advance to the realm of great power before he turned 100 was mostly due to the immortal condensation he obtained by chance. The immortal gel is the liquid dripping from the elixir of a celestial immortal transformation grass. It can not only increase the upper limit of a person's qualifications, but also increase a large amount of lifespan, and has the effect of living dead human flesh and white bones. At that time, he fought with many geniuses and monsters for 3 days and 3 nights for the immortal condensation, almost to the point of physical collapse before he captured it. Now, the junior boy standing opposite him has unexpectedly reached the realm of great power. How can the Silver Spirit Great Emperor not be curious about this? You must know that the Zhang family, one of the 9 aristocratic families, cannot produce a fairy elixir to improve the qualifications of its descendants. But the fact has indeed happened. Zhongquan's current realm is equal to his, and he has also reached the second layer of the Great Power Realm. That's right, Zhang Chuan actually did not reveal all of his cultivation in front of the two of them. There was no other reason. If he had the opportunity to meet the projection of a young great emperor today, he naturally didn't want to let this opportunity go. Zhang Chuan wanted to try it out to see who was stronger or weaker compared to the young great emperor in the same realm. Zhang Chuan, right, I admit that you did bring me a lot of surprises today, but it's a pity that the two of us are in the same realm now. The expression on the Silver Spirit Great Emperor's face was finally not as calm as before. The fierce fighting spirit in his eyes was undisguised, and his fists were slowly closed and clenched. Even though he was curious about Zhang Chuan's realm, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor obviously couldn't bear to ask him about his cultivation to a junior. Hearing this, Zhang Chuan chuckled and shook his head. The Silver Spirit Great Emperor's words were obviously telling him that in the same realm, the opponent could sweep away his peers. This is also the compulsory path for the Great Emperor. Only by overpowering all the geniuses and evildoers in this world can he be worthy of the title of God. Then he took another step forward, and his figure suddenly disappeared from where he was. The next second, Zhang Chuan's figure had arrived in front of the Yinling Great Emperor. The wind roared and he punched the opponent in the face. Seeing this, the Yinling Great Emperor's eyes narrowed, and he also punched forward, carrying the roar of the mountains and rivers, and collided with Zhang Chuan's fist. Boom! A loud sound like gold and iron clashing came out, and the two of them took a step back at the same time. Silver Spirit Great Emperor looked down at his slightly trembling and numb right hand, feeling shocked. Zhang Chuan was not only evenly matched with him in terms of strength, but even in terms of physical strength. It was only now that the Silver Spirit Great Emperor began to take Zhang Chuan seriously as an opponent. The art of killing soldiers. I saw the Silver Spirit Great Emperor shouting in a low voice, and at the same time, fairy light began to surge on the surface of his skin, and strands of 7-color light flowed on his skin. Everyone in Dongzhou knows that the reason why Yinling Great Emperor can conquer the world with his two fists is because of his top physique, the weapon-killing immortal body. And this weapon-killing technique is the powerful divine ability that comes with the incarnation of the weapon-killing immortal. It was rumored that after the great accomplishment of the weapon-killing immortal body, he could resist the Emperor weapon with his physical body alone, and the Silver Spirit Great Emperor also proved the rumors to be true. Now that the Yinling Great Emperor used the weapon-killing technique, his physical strength once again experienced a surge, and the gorgeous 7-color light shone to every corner of the Crystal Palace. I saw the aura around him soaring into the sky, and there were forces brought about by the three artistic conceptions of spear force, sword force, and fist force at the same time. At the same time, the three potentials still maintain a wonderful balance, as if they are standing on three legs. Although they are ready to move, they always stay in one place. Seeing this scene, Zhang Chuan couldn't help but frown and looked solemn. Naturally, he had also heard of the weapon-killing immortal body, and knew that it was not only physically powerful but also capable of allowing the owner to practice various artistic conceptions and master them. But the Silver Spirit Great Emperor could possess three powers at the same time before he was 100 years old. In his opinion, it was too evil. No, I should say freak. If you don't use your weapon, you will have no chance. Silver Spirit Great Emperor said lightly, his eyes filled with a strong belief that I am invincible. Then Zhang Chuan snorted coldly and pushed away all the suppression brought by the three momentums on him. To deal with you, I don't need to use weapons. At the same time as the words fell, Zhang Chuan's body burst out with two streams of extremely hot and cold air, which slowly turned into a Tai Chi yin and yang diagram as they swirled and flowed. Seeing this Silver Spirit, the Great Emperor also had a flash of surprise in his eyes. Although the opponent was not as powerful as himself, he actually possessed two of the most extreme powers at the same time, and could neutralize the two. For this alone, he had to admit that Zhang Chuan's qualifications were incredible. At this moment, endless fighting spirit burst out from the eyes of the two people, but the next second, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor took the first step. I saw him punch out, and the ferocious spear power and fist power that swallowed mountains and rivers surged towards Zhang Chuan like an overwhelming force. Zhang Chuan's right hand bluffed, and a ball of black gold flames rose up. The terrifying energy that could burn mountains and boil seas was held in the palm of his hand. Then he punched out with the same punch, but the next moment there was a stinging sensation in his right fist. Zhang Chuan immediately retreated and lowered his head to look at his right hand. He saw a huge wound on the back of his hand that was deep enough to show the bone. Blood slowly flowed out in a trickle along the wound. Only then did he realize that the Silver Spirit Great Emperor did not use his sword power in offense, but hid it in his fist power. The superposition of the two gave Zhang Chuan the illusion that the opponent was only using two potentials. Without giving Zhang Chuan time to adjust, Yinling Great Emperor bullied him again, punching out with both fists in a few breaths. Under the seemingly chaotic boxing technique, each of his punches hit Zhang Chuan's vital position very accurately. Zhang Chuan was also constantly throwing punches to resist, but in terms of physical strength and use of counterattack, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor was obviously better. As time goes by, Zhang Chuan gradually shows decline. At the same time, the Yinling Great Emperor also captured the loopholes in Zhang Chuan's punches at a certain moment. In order to suppress and defeat the opponent with absolute combat power, he took a deep breath and said calmly, "Second turn." After the words fell, the seven-color light on the surface of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor instantly dissipated, and was replaced by a flash of red light. What is even more shocking is that the three potentials circulating around him seemed to have been strengthened, making his aura become more and more unfathomable. Zhang Chuan saw this scene in full view. He had never thought before that there was a so-called second version of the weapon-killing technique. But now if he continues to fight with his current strength, he will definitely be beaten to the point where he can't find anything to do with him. Sure enough, the difference in physique is still too big. Zhang Chuan murmured to himself. As he spoke, his own aura suddenly began to rise. Great Power Realm 3rd Layer Heaven. 5th Layer Heaven. 7th Layer Heaven. Peak. This scene made the Silver Spirit Great Emperor on the opposite side, who had just upgraded the weapon-killing technique to the 2nd level, stunned on the spot. Even the next blow he was about to strike at Zhang Chuan stopped in midair. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. Zhang Chuan actually reached the peak of the powerful realm in just a few breaths. Then Silver Spirit Great Emperor waved his hand without any hesitation, and said with some reluctance, "No more fighting. If you can support dozens of moves in my hands, I will make an exception and pass on the inheritance to you too." He knew that if he continued to fight like this, he would be defeated miserably. It's better to stop fighting now and save some face. Although he is just a projection of the main body left here, he is not afraid of injury and death at all. However, if he dies once, it will most likely consume the formation spiritual source left by the subject earlier. By then, the projection power of his young silver spirit, the Great Emperor, will be irreparably weakened. Hearing that the momentum around Zhang Chuan receded like a tide, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor, who had previously withstood all the pressure, breathed a sigh of relief. Zhang Chuan lowered his head and looked at his fists, which had already been dripping with blood during the battle, and frowned slightly as he felt pain. He raised his head and looked directly at the Silver Spirit Great Emperor, with a faint smile on his lips and said, "Thank you, Great Emperor, for showing mercy. I am willing to accept the defeat." Having said that, to be honest, he had no intention of stopping before, but now the Silver Spirit Great Emperor's words clearly revealed the intention of admitting defeat. As a junior, he would naturally give the other party a step down. Hearing this, Yinling Great Emperor squeezed out a smile on his face, and looked at Zhang Chuan with a bit more appreciation. Then he stretched out a hand and once again gathered a ball of light with his fingertips. Immediately afterwards, the light group seemed to have autonomous consciousness, and began to fly away from the control of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor in the direction of Luo Yue. Luo Yue, who was standing not far away and watching, was originally puzzled as to why Zhang Chuan and the two suddenly stopped, until she discovered the light group of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor that had once again condensed and flew towards her. Only then did she realize that Zhang Chuan seemed to have persuaded the Yinling Great Emperor verbally, but the other party actually agreed. The previous fights between Zhang Chuan and Chuan took place in the Lightning Room. Luo Yue only saw a flash of red light, and then the two stopped fighting. As for who lost and who won, she could still tell from the last conversation between the two that Zhang Chuan was inferior and lost to the Yinling Great Emperor. As the light group approached, Luo Yue felt a strong attraction in her mind. Her right hand stretched out involuntarily and touched the light group. The light ball continued to shrink, following her fingertips and entering her body without any hindrance. Then Luo Yue's pupils suddenly shrank, and she felt a large amount of information sweeping into her mind like waves, giving her a splitting headache. She immediately closed her eyes, sat cross-legged on the ground and began to digest the huge amount of information in her mind. On the other side, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor nodded and smiled. The cultivation methods and experience of Emperor Fist are all left by my subject himself. With the talents of you and the other two, as long as you digest and absorb the information, you will definitely reach the entry level. Ida Euro SA sure thing. A Euro. After saying that, he turned his gaze to Zhongquan, shot his right hand into the air, and the light ball that was originally suspended in the air returned to his hand. Silver Spirit Great Emperor pushed it towards Zhongquan with a snap of his fingers, and said calmly, "After you have accepted the inheritance, I will send you away from here." Zhongquan nodded when he heard this, and at the same time stretched out a hand to suck the light ball into his body, then pretended to sit cross-legged on the ground and began to absorb it. As Zhang and Chuan began to absorb the huge amount of information in their minds, calm returned to the Crystal Palace. Since Luo Yue sat down, she has had a domineering power that has been rising continuously, and the aura of Yang Yang gradually filled the entire Crystal Palace. Silver Spirit Great Emperor's eyes wandered between the two, but his brows furrowed deeper and deeper in the next second. There was no other reason. In the eyes of Yinling Great Emperor, Luo Yue's power became more and more solid. On the other hand, there was no movement on the other side of Zhongquan. It stands to reason that Zhang Chuan can reach the peak of the great power realm at the age of less than 100 years old, and his talent in cultivation is definitely astonishing. But the current situation, Silver Spirit Great Emperor couldn't help but began to question Zhang Chuan's ability to understand. To inherit the Emperor Fist, he just had to open the opponent's mouth and feed it into the opponent's mouth with his own hands. If he couldn't swallow it into his stomach, it would be really ridiculous. Less than an hour passed, and Luo Yue opened her eyes first. She stood up and checked her physical condition, then raised a smile on her lips, raised her hands to the Silver Spirit Great Emperor and said respectfully, "Thank you Great Emperor for granting divine ability, Yue is deeply grateful." When the Yinling Great Emperor heard this, he looked at Luo Yue curiously, and there seemed to be waves surging in his heart. He had previously estimated in his mind that it would take at least half a day for Zhang and Chuan to understand a little bit of Emperor Fist. This is because the main body has packaged all kinds of experiences and cultivation techniques together. Otherwise, given the current state of the two of them, it would take at least a month to master the Emperor grade technique. But the fact is that Luo Yue understood Emperor Fist to the beginning in less than an hour. This situation far exceeded the expectations of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor. Originally, he thought that the current Zhang family was just a freak like Zhang Chuan, but he didn't expect that the Taoist monk brought by the other party today also had incredible qualifications. Then the Yinling Great Emperor waved his hand, indicating that the other party did not need to salute, and then turned his eyes to Zhongquan and stopped moving. At this time, Zhang Chuan looked like an old monk in a state of trance, with no aura leaking out from his body. If the two people present could not see each other with the naked eye, they would have even thought that Zhang Chuan had learned some secret technique of invisibility. Is there really no movement at all in the relationship? Just when the two of them were confused, the system's announcement finally sounded in Zhang Chuan's mind. Ding! Contract partner Luo Yue has successfully practiced the Imperial Fist to the basic level. Ding! 10,000 times return trigger. The host successfully cultivates the Imperial Fist to the great accomplishment. As the system's voice fell, a domineering momentum suddenly erupted in the Crystal Palace. Compared with the previous movements of Luo Yue's enlightenment, they pale into insignificance. The Silver Spirit Great Emperor and Luo Yue who were standing aside could only hear the sound of thousands of beasts roaring in their ears, and the image of thousands of people worshipping could not help but appear in their minds. The shock that Silver Spirit Great Emperor felt at this moment could only be described as beyond words. Compared with the waves surging in his heart when he saw Luo Yue getting started with Emperor Fist before, now there was almost a storm in his heart. Although the subject did not give him the use of the Imperial Fist, he still had many memories of the Imperial Fist in his mind. Judging from the commotion caused by Zhongquan just now, the Yinling Great Emperor knew that the opponent had at least cultivated the Imperial Fist to the level of great accomplishment. He has never seen such a freak. No, This kind of person can no longer be described as a freak. He is simply comparable to a son of heaven who is favored by heaven. Thinking in his mind, Silver Spirit Great Emperor couldn't help but chuckle and shook his head. Unexpectedly, in less than half a day, I would be frightened twice in a row by a junior. But then, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor suddenly paused, and a faint seven-color light flashed in his eyes, and then gradually returned to calm. On the other side, Zhang Chuan slowly opened his eyes, and the domineering aura around him disappeared instantly. He stood up and was about to politely thank the Silver Spirit Great Emperor, but was interrupted by the other party's words the next second. Zhang Chuan, you are the most evil genius among the people I have ever seen. I think that I was so high-spirited back then, but looking back now, you are not even half as good as you. As he spoke, he lightly pointed his finger at Zhangchuan, and a beam of spiritual light suddenly entered Zhangchuan's forehead. As the spiritual light appeared and disappeared, Zhang Chuan found that he could not even raise a trace of resistance. It was as if the Silver Spirit Great Emperor in front of him suddenly changed to a different person. In Zhangchuan's perception, the other party's realm is still the second layer of great power. But he had an extremely ominous premonition, as if the opponent could crush him with a devastating force just by moving his fingers. Yinling Great Emperor did not pay attention to Zhangchuan's shocked gaze at this moment, but continued, even this emperor cannot predict your future, but I believe that we will meet again. After saying that, he suddenly glanced at Luo Yue standing aside from the corner of his eye, but he didn't show any expression. Under the other party's gaze, Luo Yue felt herself falling into the ice cave, and the Daoyuan immortal body in her body began to operate unconsciously. The reaction of the Daoyuan immortal body was so violent that she almost lost her mind. After this feeling lasted for a while, it receded like a tide. Even so, Luo Yue was filled with uncertainty. At the same time, she couldn't help but be a little more wary when looking at the Silver Spirit Great Emperor. As for Zhangchuan, after a spiritual light pointed out by the Yinling Great Emperor disappeared into his body, he found that his body did not change at all. Just when he wanted to ask the other party for clarification, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor waved his sleeves, and the void in the entire Crystal Palace instantly became distorted and chaotic. The two Zhangchuan people only felt their eyes go dark, their bodies unable to move, and then they were sucked into a black vortex and disappeared. When Zhang Chuan regained control of his body, he found that he was now in the corridor where he had just entered the ancestral land trial. When he was confused, he turned his head and glanced around him. It was discovered that Luo Yue had also been teleported here with him. At this time, the other party seemed to have just awake. Then Zhang Chuan looked at the teleportation portal with a halo that was constantly flowing in front of the two of them. After thinking for a moment, he did not step into it. Luo Yue, who was standing aside, also made no move to leave. Instead, she turned her head and looked at Zhang Chuan in a tacit understanding. Both of them saw a look of disbelief in each other's eyes, and then said in unison, "The Silver Spirit Great Emperor may not be dead." Although this idea is extremely ridiculous, after all, the Silver Spirit Great Emperor was a person who lived thousands of years ago. Counting from the time the other party was born to now, it has been at least more than 20,000 years. You must know that the average lifespan of all great emperors is just over 10,000 years, and no one can live more than 20,000 years. The two people's guesses were not without basis. They had witnessed the previous changes in the aura and methods of the Silver Spirit Great Emperor with their own eyes. But the more they thought about it, the two of them entered a dead end, and many things became illogical. After Zhang Chuan thought for a moment, he said calmly to Luo Yue, "This matter cannot be determined yet. I will find an opportunity to ask the ancestor after I get out." Luo Yue just nodded and said nothing more. Then Zhang Chuan glanced at Luo Yue and took the lead to enter the teleportation portal. Turning around and staring at the back of the corridor for a while, Luo Yue's eyes flashed, and after a while she took steps to follow Zhang Chuan. In the main hall of the Zhang family. At this time, Zhang Shuyuan, Zhang Siqi and all the elders of the Zhang family were sitting in the hall waiting, while a group of direct descendants who had come out of the ancestral land trial stood respectfully in the open space below. Now everyone's eyes are fixed on the entrance of the ancestral land trial. Suddenly, the entrance began to vibrate. This movement made many Zhang family members stand on tiptoes and look around. It's Shengji and Fairy Luo who are coming out, someone in the crowd shouted. As for why some children of the Zhang family call Luo Yue Fairy Luo, it has to start with the opening of the Zhang family's ancestral land. Ever since Luo Yue was taken away by Zhang Chuan and brought to the Zhang family, the news that Celestial Immortal, the eldest princess of the Daifeng dynasty, surpassed Lu Zier of the Lu family and was hailed as the most beautiful woman in Eastern continent spread like wildfire. In the past few days, it was like locusts passing through, almost sweeping across the entire Baji region, which also caused the talented heroes from all over the East continent to rush to the Daifeng dynasty. And Prince Feng not only accepted the gifts mercilessly, but in the end he also used the name of the Zhang family to scare away everyone who came to propose marriage. Hearing that the Zhang family was also involved, even if the people who came to propose marriage knew that they had been tricked by Prince Feng, they could only swallow their breath in frustration. Although Prince Feng has a bad reputation, you must know that the Zhang family is famous for being domineering. Even if others have grievances, they dare not go to the Zhang family to reason. Immediately afterwards, everyone saw the figures of Zhang Chuan and Luo Yue walking out of the portal side by side, spinning in midair and landing like a couple of gods. With the appearance of the two people, the entrance to the ancestral land trial also began to slowly dissipate, and finally turned into scattered light spots and disappeared. Seeing this scene, Zhang Xiqi, who was sitting above him, suddenly slumped in his chair, with a look of sadness on his face. Even though a member of the Zhang family informed him of Zhang Yu's death before, he still didn't want to believe it and always looked forward to his son appearing in front of him again. But now, as the entrance to the ancestral land trial is closed, his last hope has been shattered. At the same time, a plan emerged in Zhang Xiqi's mind. Since it was Zhang Shangming who killed his son, he would secretly destroy the collateral lineage of Zhang Shangming's relatives to relieve his hatred. Then he took a deep breath, slowly stood up from his seat, followed Zhang Shuyuan and a group of clan elders to greet Zhang Chuan. Zhang Shuyuan, who was walking at the front, had a faint smile on his face. He came to Zhang Chuan in a few steps, reached out and patted the other person's shoulder and said with a smile, "It seems that you have gained a lot from this, Xiaochuan, right?" "There are indeed some big gains." Zhang Chuan chuckled and nodded. Then he turned to look at Zhang Xiqi at the back of the crowd and said, "But I have something important that I want to discuss with my third uncle." As soon as these words came out, everyone looked at Zhang Xiqi in unison. At this time, Zhang Xiqi was still suffering from the grief of losing his son, so he just said lightly, "Why are you looking for me?" Zhang Chuan looked directly at the other person and said word by word, "Cousin Zhang Yu has a few last words that he asked me to tell you, my third uncle." Hearing this, Zhang Xiqi suddenly raised his head, only to see his eyes widening and his whole body shaking with excitement. He walked forward quickly, grabbed Zhang Chuan's arm with both hands, and said excitedly, "Xiaochuan, please tell me, what does he want to say to me?" "Third uncle, don't get excited," Zhang Chuan said as he glanced at the other person's hands on his arms, stretched out his hands to push them away. "Why don't you take a step to talk?" As Zhang Chuan's words fell, Zhang Xiqi finally remembered that there was a group of spectators watching around him, and quickly agreed to Zhang Chuan's request and led him to the corner of the main hall. In the corner, Zhang Xiqi stared straight at Zhang Chuan, and spoke again with a little sincerity in his tone. "Xiaochuan, can you tell your third uncle now?" At this moment, Zhang Chuan's lips suddenly revealed an imperceptible sneer, and then he said seriously, "Of course." After saying that, he took a step forward and walked up to Zhang Xiqi, slowly put his mouth to the other person's ear, and said in a joking tone, "Cousin Zhang Yu asked me to tell you that he died miserably inside. When Zhang Shangming stabbed his heart, he was so powerless and desperate that he couldn't rest in peace even after death. But third uncle, when it comes to Zhang Shangming, this junior does have some say. Because, he is the one I sent to kill your son." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Xiqi's eyes were already bloodshot and his lower lip began to tremble. He turned his head stiffly, and what he saw was Zhang Chuan's harmless smile. Then Zhang Chuan suddenly put away his smile and took a step back, lowered his head and whispered to Zhang Xiqi solemnly, "Third uncle, my condolences." Everyone present couldn't help but sigh when they saw Zhang Xiqi's reaction at this moment. The third elder wants to express his condolences. Now that the Holy Sun has brought Brother Zhang Yu's last words back, looking at the expression on the third elder's face, he must be missing Brother Zhang Yu. It was also the Holy Sun who executed Zhang Shangming with his own hands, which was regarded as revenge for Zhang Yu. Seeing that the third elder is now suffering from the pain of losing his son, I can't bear it. I am willing to accept the third elder as my godfather and fulfill my filial piety for the rest of my life. Everyone. After hearing this, everyone present invariably looked at the children of the Zhang family who were trying to recognize Zhang Siqi as their godfather, with expressions of disdain on their faces. This person also realized that the purpose of his words was too obvious, and he retreated to the back in embarrassment and stopped making any sound. On the other side, Zhang Siqi's blood-red eyes stared at Zhang Chuan, his eyes filled with hatred. The sudden double blow made his mind turn into a mess, and he still couldn't recover for a while. Originally, Zhang Siqi thought that his son's murderer had been killed, but now Zhang Chuan's words broke through his psychological defense again. Zhang Siqi's doting on Zhang Yu is well known among the Zhang family. As long as Zhang Yu asks for it, the other party will try his best to get it. Such a doting father, how could he watch his son's murderer roam free? At this moment, all he could think about was the harmless smile on Zhang Chuan's face after he finished speaking to him. In his eyes, that smile was as hideous and hateful as a devil's whisper. Just when everyone thought the matter was over, Zhang Siqi took a few steps forward, trembling all over. He glanced at everyone present with wide eyes, his eyes passing over the familiar faces. But for some reason, the expressions of regret on everyone's faces looked more like ridicule in his eyes. For a moment, Zhang Siqi felt that his whole field of vision was spinning. Zhang Chuan standing in front of him suddenly turned into a ferocious monster, grinning and roaring at him. At the same time, the aura around him began to rise, which was a dark red aura filled with violence and blood. Zhang Siqi lost his mind at this moment and went crazy. Looking at the ferocious monster transformed by Zhang Chuan in front of him, he shouted, "Evil beast! I want you to pay with blood." After the words fell, Zhang Siqi activated the seal and slapped Zhang Chuan's chest with all his strength. Faced with Zhang Siqi's sudden attack, everyone present looked shocked and no one reacted for a while. Even Zhang Shuyuan did not expect that the other party would attack Zhang Chuan in front of him and the elders of the clan. Even though Zhang Siqi has a very high status in the Zhang family and holds most of the say, who is Zhang Chuan? That was the holy son of the clan, the only son of the family head, and now he, the second uncle, is also here. For daring to take action against Zhang Chuan and showing murderous intent, the best outcome Zhang Siqi would face would be to have his cultivation level revoked and thrown into Yang's prison. On the other side, Zhang Chuan had been slapped by Zhang Siqi, and he vomited blood and flew backwards. I saw a large dent in his chest, and blood was oozing from his mouth and nose. After landing, he rolled miserably on the ground for several times before stopping. Ahima euro, a euro. Zhang Chuan vomited blood and said with a surprised expression, "Uncle San, what's wrong with you?" "I'm Xiao Chuan." Seeing Zhang Chuan, who was still alive despite his full blow and even had the strength to speak. "Broken earth Zanyu." Zhang Siqi roared again, and a king's sword appeared in his hand, as if he planned to use the great divine ability to destroy Zhangchuan and the main palace of the Zhang family. The terrifying and violent sword power formed with Zhang Siqi as the center, forming billowing air waves that spread in all directions. The sword energy soaring into the sky seemed to be able to really smash the earth and tear apart the stars and the moon. Faced with such a terrifying blow, Zhang Chuan just stood up unsteadily, and a teasing smile slowly appeared at the corner of his mouth covered in blood. But suddenly, a white and slender jade hand took his arm and led him to the crowd at the back. "How are you doing?" Luo Yue let go of her right hand on Zhang Chuan's arm and asked absently. With so many Zhang family members watching, even though she saw Zhang Chuan being seriously injured, she felt secretly happy. But now as Zhang Chuan's fiancé copyrightee, she felt that she still had to do something. Zhang Chuan coughed a few times, bringing out traces of blood. Hearing this, he glanced at the other party and said lightly, "It doesn't matter, it's just a minor injury. It's you. When did this holy sun ask you to come out and save me?" Luo Yue's eyes flashed, then she didn't speak, she just turned her head to one side. Sure enough, she shouldn't have run out to pull the other person back. On the other side, Zhang Xiqi held a sword with both hands and slashed it in the direction of everyone. Sooner or later, a bit of cold light arrived first, and with the sound of gold and iron clashing, the sword power that filled the entire main hall instantly collapsed and disappeared. Zhang Xiqi tried his best to activate his spiritual power, but found that the long sword in his hand was still difficult to move forward. Looking up at Zhang Shuyuan, who was holding a spear in front of him, Zhang Xiqi shouted angrily, "You all deserve to die, get out of here." As he spoke, he slashed forward with his sword, trying to lift the spear that was blocking him. But Zhang Shuyuan obviously would not give him this opportunity. "Xiqi, the moment you took action against Agawa, your outcome was already doomed." He flipped his wrist and stabbed straight with his spear, and the power of a fierce dragon suddenly came towards Zhang Xiqi. At the same moment, the entire space in the main hall seemed to be blocked, and everyone's heart stopped beating at this moment. The same was true for Zhang Xiqi at this time. The spear tip shooting out cold light was like an overwhelming thunder tribulation in his eyes, and he could not avoid it. A sense of powerlessness filled his whole body, and he didn't have the courage to fight back when facing the pointed spear. Ah! Zhang Xiqi bit the tip of his tongue tightly, and a little blood stained his lips and teeth, and used all his strength to activate Conferred Sovereign's 8th layer heavenly cultivation. The next second, under the influence of pain, he finally regained control of his body. He hurriedly raised his sword to resist, but under his blank gaze, the spearlight went straight through his sword and hands and turned into nothingness. Immediately afterwards, Zhang Xiqi felt a chill on the back of his head, and warm blood slowly flowed down from his forehead. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The blood overflowing in his throat seemed to hinder his speech. The battle between the two ended in just a few breaths, and everyone present quickly looked at it intently. I saw Zhang Shuyuan arriving behind Zhang Xiqi at some point, holding a spear and with an unusually cold expression on his face. The tip of the spear had already penetrated Zhang Xiqi's head and nailed him to the spot. Zhang Shuyuan said calmly, "You have done your own evil and you will not survive. Now that you have become possessed, I will help you get rid of it earlier." As soon as the words fell, the tip of the spear that penetrated Zhang Xiqi's head flipped over instantly, and a breath of domination poured into the opponent's body along with the tip of the spear. Immediately afterwards, cracks began to cover Zhang Xiqi's body, and the next second his body exploded, leaving no blood behind, and turned into a ball of ash and dissipated. Everyone present couldn't help but swallow their saliva when they saw this. The third elder, who was about to reach the peak of Conferred Sovereign, was stabbed to death by Zhang Shuyuan without any delay. Well, it seems that the third elder really went crazy because of the grief of losing his parent and child. Yes, the Holy Son brought back his last words with good intentions, but he was almost killed by him. I feel unfair for the Holy Son. It's fortunate that the second elder and the clan elders are here. If it weren't for us, we might not be able to leave the main hall. While all the Zhang family disciples were shocked, they all used their spiritual consciousness to communicate with the people around them. The elders of various ethnic groups standing at the front had different expressions, and a small number of them even looked unnatural. They are all people who have not yet taken sides, saying they are neutral but intentionally favoring Zhang Xiqi. Among them, the descendants and great-grandchildren of several also died in the trials of the ancestral land. With Zhang Xiqi's lessons learned, even if they had doubts, they did not dare to speak out at this moment. Now I see Zhang Shuyuan not thinking about his brotherhood at all and killing him with his hands. A thought suddenly appeared in several people's minds. I'm afraid things are going to change for the Zhang family. Zhang Shuyuan didn't care about the reactions of everyone in the Zhang family. He only saw his wrist shake, and the body of the spear instantly took on a new look. Then he put away his spear and walked up to Zhang Chuan. His eyes stayed on the other man's chest for a moment before he said, "You are seriously injured. You will stay here for a while, and I will help you heal your injuries personally." After saying that, Zhang Shuyuan raised his head and glanced around, walked to Zhang Chuan's side, grabbed the other's arm with one hand and held him steady. Then he waved his hand and said to everyone present, "Please leave now. Remember to digest what you gained from this trial in the ancestral land when you return." All the children of the Zhang family nodded in agreement, and then everyone, including Luo Yue and the elders of various clans, left respectfully from the main hall gate. At this moment, Zhang Shuyuan and Zhang Chuan were the only two people left in the entire main hall. Zhang Shuyuan put down his hand holding Zhang Chuan, with a knowing smile on his lips. He stared at Zhang Chuan, who was still vomiting blood next to him, and chuckled, "Okay, how long do you have to pretend in front of your second uncle?" Hearing this, Zhang Chuan, who was still bending over and vomiting blood, suddenly straightened up and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his hand. At the same time, the pit on his chest was restored to its original state at this moment. "Sure enough, nothing can be hidden from your eyes, second uncle." Zhang Chuan shook his head and pursed his lips. Zhang Shuyuan glanced at the other party, slowly put his hands behind his back and said, "As your second uncle, I naturally knew something about your father's handing over of that holy-grade defensive jade pendant to you." "Wait a minute, second uncle, you said that jade pendant is a holy weapon?" Zhang Chuan said with a surprised look on his face. Zhang Chuan has always thought that all the holy soldiers of the Zhang family have always been owned by their owners. After all, if you take one of these rare weapons, you will lose one. When Zhang Shiren handed the jade pendant to him, he only told him that if he encountered someone that Mr. Wu could not deal with, the jade pendant could save his life, but he did not explain what grade the jade pendant was. Zhang Chuan took off the jade pendant hanging from his neck and put it in his hand to look at it carefully. I saw that the jade pendant was overall blue, and the light on its surface had already dimmed at this moment, and there was a crack dividing it in the middle. Obviously, this jade pendant was completely damaged after being used once. At this moment, Zhang Chuan suddenly regretted taking the big risk to lure Zhang Xiqi into action. If he handed a holy weapon to Luo Yue, what would he get after returning it 10,000 times? This jade pendant is called Shizhuan Jade. It was obtained by your father by chance in his early years. Its effect is unparalleled. As long as its owner is in a life or death crisis, it will turn back time to the time when its owner was at its peak. Having it is equivalent to having an extra life. Zhang Shuyuan looked at Zhang Chuan and explained with a smile. Zhang Chuan nodded, and at the same time he couldn't help but start making calculations in his mind. One day, I have to go back to Kangyuan sword sect and ask my father if he still has this kind of Shizhuan jade so that he can test it. But then Zhang Shuyuan suddenly changed the subject, frowned and said seriously, but the situation just now was too risky. If you have any plans next time, Xiaochuan, you must inform my second uncle in advance. I will get rid of Zhang Xiqi sooner or later. Now that you, Agawa, are the trigger, the time has just been advanced. As he spoke, something seemed to flash in his eyes. Zhang Shuyuan knew in his heart that after this incident, those self-righteous old foxes watching from the sidelines should settle down. Hearing this, Zhang Chuan just shook his head and said calmly, Zhang Xiqi has been hostile to me for a long time, but if I get rid of him too early, I will feel uneasy. He always puts his own interests first, and Zhang Xiqi's existence obviously blocks his future plan to dominate the Zhang family. Get rid of the opponent as soon as possible, and he will have one less obstacle in the future. Zhang Chuan only needs the people below to surrender to him. At this time, Zhang Shuyuan's eyes were looking at Zhang Chuan for a moment, and the admiration in his eyes became stronger. Xiaochuan, he looks more and more like his elder brother. Zhang Shuyuan murmured to himself. Then he seemed to remember something. Without waiting for Zhang Chuan's reaction, he grabbed the other person's shoulder with one hand and disappeared in the next moment. In just the blink of an eye, Zhang Chuan suddenly found that he had been taken to the mountains behind the Zhang family by Zhang Shuyuan. In the back mountain, there are green mountains and green waters. A huge waterfall hangs from the mountain wall, flowing down to form a small lake. A small wooden house stands quietly on the edge of the lake. There is a large field of moonflower planted outside the wooden house. As the name suggests, whenever night falls, the flower will bloom in the direction of the moon, absorbing the essence of the moon and storing it in its rhizomes. Zhang Chuan could see that those moonflowers were growing extremely well, and it was obvious that someone had taken special care of them. At this time, there was a sound of opening the door in the small wooden house opposite Zhang Chuan. Zhang Chuan turned his head and looked in the direction of the wooden house, and saw a short old man in purple walking out of the wooden house with the door wide open. Every step of the purple-clothed old man walked extremely slowly, and there was no trace of breath on his body, as if he was really just an old man in his dying years. Just when Zhang Chuan was guessing the identity of the other party, Zhang Shuyuan took a step forward under his suspicious gaze, nodded respectfully and said, "See the 9 ancestors." Zhu nodded, and then said with a serious face, "Shuyuan, how many times have I told you not to take your time when doing things? I have repeatedly emphasized to you that I will bring Xiaochuan to see you after the trial in the ancestral land is over. Do you know how long I waited?" Hearing this, Zhang Shuyuan twitched the corner of his mouth, but did not speak to refute, and stood aside lazily. Seeing this, Zhu didn't say anything more to Zhang Shuyuan, but looked at Zhangchuan with a smile on his face. On the other side, after hearing the conversation between the two, Zhang Chuan realized that the seemingly ordinary old man in purple was actually the 9th ancestor of the legendary dragon. Under the admiring gaze of the 9 patriarchs, he cupped his hands and said calmly, "Junior Zhang Chuan, join the 9 ancestors." At this time, Zhu had already stepped in front of Zhang Chuan, looked at Zhang Chuan again, nodded frequently and said, Okay, Agawa, you should have seen the projection left by the Silver Spirit Great Emperor during the Ancestral Land trial, right?" Zhang Chuan blinked, and while being shocked in his heart, he asked curiously, "How did you know, Zhu?" Zhang Shuyuan, who was standing aside, was also shocked and his eyes widened. He had previously guessed that with the strength Zhang Chuan showed in the blood-forging pond last time, he would have a chance to reach the last level, where he would meet his eldest brother Zhang Shiren. But now the 9 ancestors say that Zhangchuan has seen the projection of the Yinling Great Emperor, which means that the opponent is stronger than Zhang Shiren, who swept through the 5 saints and 9 families back then. Ancestor Zhu stroked the sparse white beard on his chin, his expression remained unchanged, he smiled and said, "Your current situation is the same as when he Shiren received the inheritance. You cannot fully absorb the changes brought to you by Emperor-grade divine ability in your body." After saying that, he pointed his fingers towards the void, and a burst of ethereal energy suddenly entered Zhangchuan's body. The next moment, although Zhang Chuan could not feel any changes in his realm, skills, or the secret technique of divine ability, he found that the aura around him was more restrained, and he seemed to have a feeling of returning to his original nature. The puzzled expression on Zhang Chuan's face was all seen by Zhu, who smiled and explained, "Don't worry, now you are just restraining your own aura, your strength will not be affected." Zhangchuan nodded when he heard this. "Junior understands. Don't look at it now that he is just keeping his breath in his body, without any improvement in strength. But when he fights at a higher level, this can often have an unexpected effect." Then Zhang Chuan glanced at Zhang Shuyuan and found that the other party had taken out a recliner and lay down at some point, holding a storybook and reading with gusto. Seeing that the other party left him alone after sending him here, Zhang Chuan curled his lips and asked Zhu, "Gina ancestor, if you ask this junior to come here, it should be more than just helping me control my breath, right?" After hearing this, the 9th patriarch flicked his beard with his right hand for a moment, then slowly put it down, and the smile on his face subsided and said, "Yes, I am looking for you this time to ask you to accept the baptism of my Zhang family's ancestral land. I think Shuyuan has told you about this before, right?" Zhang Chuan raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. Then he remembered that on the day he took Luo Yue back to the Zhang family, Zhang Shuyuan did talk to him about the baptism of the ancestral land. But at that time, his thoughts were all on how to deal with Zhang Siqi, and he did not pay attention to the baptism of his ancestral land. Now that the 9 ancestors told Zhang Chuan about this again, he realized that the trials of the ancestral land and the baptism of the ancestral land were actually started one after another. Although Zhang Chuan didn't know much about the baptism in the ancestral land, he was still clear about the impact the baptism had on the Zhang family. The baptism of the ancestral land is not like a trial. It is personally arranged by the Great Emperor, the first emperor of the Zhang family, named Wenshan. The youngling in it can not only improve the cultivation level of people with Zhang family blood, but also activate the emperor's blood in the Zhang family's body that has been thinned for tens of thousands of years. This is why Zhang Siqi had previously strongly recommended to Zhang Shuyuan that his son should also be baptized. Although Zhang Siqi was not from the Zhang family, Zhang Yu was the son of the other party and a direct daughter of the Zhang family, so he naturally had a hint of imperialism. Blood. On the other side, Juzu had already put his hands behind his back, turned around and walked towards the waterfall. His old voice faintly reached Zhang Chuan's ears, "Come with me." Zhang Chuan nodded in agreement and followed closely. Arriving at the small lake below the waterfall, Zhang Chuan looked at Juzu's wrinkled side face and said curiously, "Ninth ancestor, the ancestral land baptism you mentioned is not in this lake, right?" I saw Juzu shaking his head, yes and no. After saying that, he raised his right hand, spread his fingers slightly and pressed down gently. Zhang Chuan felt that the surrounding space began to vibrate violently under the opponent's actions, and a power that looked down on the world was about to erupt from the Zhu ancestor's body. At this moment, the short figure of Juzu seemed to turn into a giant standing tall in Zhang Chuan's eyes. As Zhu ancestor pressed his palm, the water in the entire lake began to rotate rapidly, forming a huge whirlpool. At the same time, the waterfall above seemed to have been sealed and stopped at this moment, and could no longer flow into the lake. The splashing drops of water were clearly visible. Just as Zhangchuan was concentrating on staring at the hole inside the whirlpool, Juzu suddenly took his right hand and drew a few drops of blood across his palm with one finger. Juzu raised his palm to control the blood and gathered it into a small blood bead, then slapped it out with one palm. The small blood droplet drew an arc from the air and accurately escaped into the center of the vortex. Immediately afterwards, the entire whirlpool began to turn bright red like blood due to the entry of Zhang Chuan's blood, and then gradually changed to dark as black as ink. At this time, Juzu had already let go of Zhang Chuan's right hand, but Zhang Chuan didn't care that there was only a little blood. The palm that was scratched by the other party had already healed as before due to the recovery power of his powerful body. Looking at the slightly strange black vortex in front of him, Zhang Chuan asked curiously, "Ninth ancestor, what are we doing now?" The prerequisite for starting the baptism of the ancestral land is that the Zhang family's bloodline needs to be activated. As he spoke, Juzu spread his right hand, and a dark stone seal floated quietly in his hand. This is the boundary-breaking stone seal. After you are baptized, Xiaochuan, you will use it to open a portal and come out. As the Juzu's words fell, the dark whirlpool in the lake gradually stopped rotating, but it still maintained its whirlpool state. Zhang Chuan looked at the hole in the center of the lake that was still rotating at an extremely slow speed. He felt as if there was a voice inside the hole constantly calling him, urging him to hurry in. "Go in." Juzu reached out and patted Zhang Chuan on the shoulder. Hearing this, Zhang Chuan glanced at the other party, nodded towards him, and then jumped into the center of the whirlpool, disappearing instantly. At the same time, after watching Zhang Chuan enter the inside of the whirlpool, Juzu raised his palms, and the waterfall that had stopped flowing in the lake that turned into a dark whirlpool returned to their original state at this moment. Immediately afterwards, he didn't care that someone had jumped into the lake just now, and controlled the lake water to rise into the sky with both fingers, letting it scatter evenly into the field of moon-facing flowers. On the other side, Zhang Shuyuan put down the storybook in his hand at some point, sat up straight on the recliner, and looked straight at the lake that had already calmed down with his eyes flashing. "Ninth ancestor, do you think that with Xiaochuan's strength, how much can the purity of the emperor's blood in his body increase after receiving the baptism of the ancestral land?" Zhang Shuyuan lowered his eyes and said calmly. Ancestor Zhu also set his sights on the lake, pondered for a moment and then said, "At least he is much stronger than you two brothers were back then." Hearing this, Zhang Shuyuan curled his lips and said with a smile, "Back then, my eldest brother and I were baptized together. Now, of the two of us, I am the only one who has no children. This is an advantage for Xiaochuan. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.